welcome to episode 6. Today I'm chatting with an old pal, Tim Wigham, another former Royal Marine, been in the corporate world for the last 25 years, so I have lots to learn from him today as well. So cheers, Tim.
Cheers,
good to see you, mate. Thanks for doing this.
No, thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, it's good. We shall have a good chat.
Yes, indeed. Indeed.
Right, so Tim, people out there, who's Tim? And over to you.
Yeah, I mean, who's Tim? That's as deep a question as I want to make it, I guess.
Yeah, you have free reign.
Yeah.
So yeah.
No,
so,
I mean, look, I guess there's probably two parts to answer that question. I guess there's the quick CV. Born in South Africa, grew up in Zimbabwe, went to school in Zimbabwe, took a year off travelling after school, and as part of that travelling ended up in the UK as an 18-year-old, not 100% sure where my life was going, what I was going to do, and my dad was in the UK at the time, over from Southern Africa, and he'd been at school in the UK, and he had done a lot of cadet stuff at school with the Royal Marines. I think he'd probably done various different mini exercises with perhaps different elements of the UK armed services. But he was most impressed with the Marines. I knew nothing, no preconceived understanding of the British military world. But British passport, because my dad British, mum South African. So when he kind of suggested I have a look at it, I did. One thing led to another, and I guess 9 years later I'd had a short career in the Marines, at which point I decided I wanted to return to South Africa, get a bit of a student experience, which would also be an opportunity to harness transferable skills, as I say, from a military background into a new civilian commercial career. So I did that, and I was, I guess at this stage, just in summary, I was basically in South Africa 2001 through 2012, finding my feet in a career beyond the military, which was essentially management consulting and trying to figure out what version of that worked for me. And through a series of events, I ended up meeting and joining a consultancy that was based in Aberdeen, Scotland, which then in 2012 effectively brought myself and young family from South Africa back to the UK, but this time to Aberdeen. And so for the last 12 years, I've been primarily based in Aberdeen, but in the last couple of years, on the back of COVID, decided to move the family base back to Cape Town again. So to and fro the equator quite a few times, I would say, in my life, which has been good. I've enjoyed that. I like the blend. I like the interesting juxtaposition of the kind of colonial lifestyle and then the mothership of the UK. It's kind of it's a connection that I personally quite enjoy. So I guess that's the first part maybe of the question, who's Tim, just a sort of CV, of birth to where I'm at now. In terms of who am I as a person, I mean, that's a great question, and perhaps we don't confront that often enough. I have a slightly obsessive side to my personality, so I kind of need to have a goal at any stage of my life, something that I'm working towards, something that's putting me under a little bit of pressure, and requiring a bit of focus. Because what I have realized, reflecting on myself over the years, is that if I don't have a goal outside of work and family, then I can get frustrated, and I can find myself kind of drifting and that might sound a bit weird because work and family can be intense enough, but I think what I've realized is that I kind of need a hobby or an extramural activity that gives me purpose, meaning, inspiration, and kind of draws me forward. So that's probably the first point I'd make if I peel back the layers and get brutally honest about myself. And I guess the downside of that slightly obsessive kind of personality trait is that if you don't set a productive, purposeful goal, you can find yourself going down the wrong rabbit holes and kind of wasting time and or getting caught up in stuff that perhaps you don't really want to. So from being brutally honest, discovering that about myself has been important, and I kind of reference that quite a lot just to keep myself on track. I'm a man of faith. I believe in Christ, so I'm Christian. That's a challenge for me because I've found throughout my life I've challenged my faith, wrestled with my faith, fallen short time and again. But something has brought me back every time to a belief. The 3 C's actually are always good to bring me back to faith. One is creation, one is Christ, one is consciousness. I don't think we're here on this planet by accident. I just can't bring myself to believe that. Christ definitely existed. The question is, did he die and rise again? And that's challenging to believe, but I continue to believe that given the narrative and the fact that it's still so relevant today, the balance of probability is that he did. And then consciousness, which is something that scientists today are exploring and discovering more and more, is that there really is something to this idea of consciousness, this connectivity that we have with each other and with the universe. And again, that has a Christian foundation as much as a science foundation. So those 3 C's are things that I always reference to people who ask me about my faith, and kind of keep me grounded in it, even though I, like most, fall short often, struggle with it, and kind of pray about it to kind of keep me on the straight and narrow. So that's another thing I would say about myself. Peeling back the layers, I think I'm quite a soft person inside. So, I've been lucky enough to be involved in some tough aspects of life, but I'm a very soft person inside, which I think is what kind of drew me to coaching and working with people. Sort of once I'd left the military, and that's great. That's really made me feel congruent with who I really am. And one of the reasons I say that is, I guess like many of us, when I'd left the military, there was a potential draw to the security type of world, or to follow on stuff. And for me, I thought, well, actually, maybe that is an opportunity to get into, but I realized quite quickly that it requires a certain type of toughness that's not for me. It wasn't appropriate for me, and actually, it was quite good for me to realize that sooner than later. So grateful for that, and then I guess fitness. Fitness is something that's definitely been a golden thread through my life. Primary school, I realized that I really enjoyed running, track and field type stuff, and then initially went to a school where it was mainly football, and then a school after that which was very much about rugby, and then kind of continued playing a lot of rugby. So kind of running and rugby at school, really enjoyed. And I think I found my sport experience much more kind of gratifying and conducive to personal growth than classroom stuff. Even though I appreciated that academic progress was important, I would definitely say that at school, what lit the fire within me was team sport, or competition, or a combination. And then lucky enough to kind of progress into the Royal Marines, which is a physical lifestyle, as you know yourself.
Reasonably. Yeah.
You know, so I thrived on that.
Yeah.
I absolutely loved that.
It's a fantastic environment,
isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, so I think that, you know, in terms of who I am, there's no question that, for example, now if I haven't done any exercise, I feel frustrated. I start to feel, you know, annoyed, jittery. I need to do something, if not daily, then certainly regularly. And that's kind of been a theme through life, you know, Marines. And then after that, kind of got into a fair amount of endurance type sport. You know, not at a high level, but certainly at a competitive level.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it was, you know, endurance running, endurance cycling, triathlon, adventure racing, and it's interesting because I probably reached a point of kind of saturation, exhaustion with that, just as I got into the energy sector, oil and gas industry, and started working offshore.
Okay.
And actually, you know, I realized at that point that trying to train or put the hours in that you kind of need for endurance stuff when you're on a rig with an inconsistent gym facility was probably not the best. So at that point, again, wanting to maintain fitness and exercise, I kind of followed the trend at that point. This is going back maybe 15 years of cross training, what became CrossFit, kind of high intensity interval training type stuff, which was great because it was something different to the endurance stuff, totally different, and therefore had a certain novelty, which at that stage of my life was kind of cool. So fitness as well. But I don't know, maybe stop there and see if you've got any follow-on cues or whether any of that resonates with you.
Well, I mean, there's a ton of stuff in that alone, isn't there? You know, it's and I think kind of dipping into that obsessive piece.
Yeah.
I mean, I can relate to that.
No doubt.
In my own way, fitness is particularly, you know, sports and staying fit.
Yeah.
Which obviously is kind of crucial for serving in the Royal Marines.
Yeah.
Did you get at school in Zimbabwe?
Mm-hmm.
What was particularly with obviously like the rugby, because I know you watch football, but you're not as much of a fan of it as you are the rugby.
Correct. Yeah.
Do you think there was much of an influence in terms of that team environment and the competitiveness and the desire to push and to win?
Yeah.
And I think there is a strong similarity between a rugby mindset and being in the corps.
Yeah. Yeah.
There is a strong correlation.
Yeah,
I think
definitely.
Do you think that helped? That was an influence in your decision? Obviously, your father introduced you to the Royal Marines and the concept of becoming a part of that. Do you think rugby had anything to do with that?
I think you hit the nail on the head with your point about the mindset. I wouldn't necessarily say rugby had anything to do with it directly, but indirectly, yes, massively, 100%.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. And indeed, I was lucky enough to end up playing rugby for the Marines. I was lucky enough to captain the Marines on one occasion. And you're absolutely right. It's quite funny, actually. When friends of mine used to ask me what it was like being in the Royal Marines or at the end of my short career in the Marines, I said it was like an 8-year rugby tour. For all the best reasons. You know, the camaraderie.
Fantastic.
Yeah. The camaraderie, facing adversity together.
Yeah.
The nerves and the anxiety going into tough games or tough tournaments.
Mm-hmm.
But doing that with brothers, in arms or brothers facing adversity together, and then of course afterwards this shared accomplishment or commiseration, the celebration, the bonds of friendship that are formed, whether it's rugby or the Marines. You're spot on. Very similar mental model, very similar mindset required to confront that anxiety that builds before games, and indeed then that hard work and sometimes that picking yourself back up when you're on the back foot or you're down or you're behind. All so similar, but yeah, probably mainly the similarity is that camaraderie, just genuine teamwork, like true teamwork at the highest possible level. And I'm just so grateful to the Royal Marines primarily, but certainly rugby and my experience with rugby in general, for that understanding of what a true team feels like and looks like. It's kind of that, if you kind of sum it up, you've got that shared goal, but you've also got that shared commitment to achieve the goal and a shared understanding of what it's going to take to work together to achieve that. Trust, communication that works, non-verbal communication. You can look at someone and have a conversation without saying anything, because you know each other so well. Very similar actually, very similar for sure. And there's something about the combative element of rugby as well, isn't there?
Yes.
The physical side, the requirement for courage. My son plays rugby now, and I always say to him, I'd much rather you tackle with courage and don't miss a tackle than score a try and don't do anything else on the pitch. So for me, like defense, tackling, working hard for your teammates is a way more significant indicator of your character and measure of who you are as a person and a team player than being the guy that scores 5 tries in a game but does little else. So I like your point actually. Very similar mindset, and I guess very, very grateful to my dad for recognizing what would attract me to a military career, and then in the Marines in particular, because I wouldn't have known that. I just didn't have the reference points, having grown up in Southern Africa. The UK military, there were some of my mates at school who were running around with heavy rucksacks, and I thought, okay, that looks like an interesting way of training, but they were preparing to try and go into the British Army or the British military, and I just hadn't paid enough attention or been curious enough to understand what was the process, etc. So really grateful to my dad for kind of formalising that suggestion in the UK. While I was doing a year of travel and working my way around, because that was probably the most important decision of my life, was to choose to pursue a career in the Royal Marines, because the foundation that provided for the rest of my life is difficult to describe adequately, for all the right reasons. Just the set of values, the ethos, the principles, the opportunity to lead and to serve and to be part of teams in challenging environments, protecting freedom, serving a country, serving a philosophy, and of course, on a more kind of lighter note, seeing a lot of the world, having a lot of fun, doing a lot of travel, having a lot of time off, playing a lot of sport, and kind of getting this world-class education in people management and shared collective responsibility and mission achievement, mission accomplishment. Which is very difficult to learn or teach in environments outside the military or the Marines. So, yeah, hugely grateful for that.
Yeah, there's I've got another thought that we spoke about previously, actually.
Mm-hmm.
But I'll come back to that. And that's that. What I'm thinking about is, growing up in South Africa and Zimbabwe, I think that part of the world develops a sturdier breed. I think the more often because it's a harder place to live.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful place to live.
Yeah.
But it's a harder environment.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of, by default, you develop a lot of situational awareness.
Yeah.
Because of the kind of the dangers of that part of the world.
Yeah.
Particularly being as wonderfully tanned as we are.
Yeah.
So I think you have to be more resilient from from an early age, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. What's interesting for me is that the British people who left these shores to explore the world were my ancestors.
Yes.
And of course many others who went to Africa, Australasia, the Americas,
yep.
Asia. And yeah, you said it, maybe a sturdier breed, certainly whether it was for survival or to explore, either way, it required a bit of a get up and go type of mindset, didn't it?
For sure.
You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Sort of be prepared to explore beyond the comfort zone, to leave what you know behind and search other shores for opportunities, but no doubt face potential risk, potential danger, expect the unexpected, etc. So yeah, it's a good point you make, and I guess I'm grateful to my parents, grandparents, and those before them who were Brits, from Scotland and England, who decided to travel. And indeed, to be honest, it's interesting, it was actually the Second World War. If I only go back 2 generations in my case, my maternal grandfather was a doctor on a British ship,
right,
which was sunk in the Indian Ocean, I think I'm right in saying, maybe in the Atlantic, but he was sunk close to South Africa. And while he was recovering in hospital in South Africa, that's where he met my grandmother, who is South African. And then on the other side, my paternal grandfather served in the First World War as a 16-year-old in the trenches in France, miraculously survived that, and went on to serve in the Second World War in Abyssinia, sort of northeast Africa, and that part of the world. And because of his service in that part of the world, he actually shot in the leg during the Second World War, and so forever had a limp thereafter, and that's how I remember him. But because of his service in that part of the world, he ended up with his wife, my grandmother, after the Second World War, moving to Kenya to manage a massive ranch east of Nairobi, in Kenya, which is where my dad was born as a kind of British Commonwealth citizen. And so, I don't have to go too many generations back. And, let's be honest, the World Wars, particularly the Second World War, probably influenced and affected lots of family trees in terms of, allies fighting in different parts of the world, and maybe that influencing where they lived thereafter.
Yeah.
But look, I think you're right, Simon. I think you're spot on. Perhaps the DNA that's been passed down is from, in many cases, former Brits who left the UK, had that sense of adventure about them, which has been passed down to the people that now live in the former colonies in the Commonwealth, as you say, South Africa, Zimbabwe, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and the US. And you're right, you do notice that, don't you? There's a certain attitude of anything is possible, perhaps, that you see.
Yeah, I think the more open-minded, there's a curiosity to explore and to learn.
Yeah.
There's a big drive from a lot of people that I've met from the Southern Hemisphere. Yeah. From I guess empire days, colonial days.
Yeah.
It's just an interest. I people watch all the time.
Yeah.
And I love to pick up on from conversations, and different how different people are from different countries, different the whole the mindset, the attitude, how culture has shaped that, and how that's shaped culture.
Yes.
Because it's a two-way street, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's just. I think maybe that's probably had a big part of why you joined the Corps.
Yeah.
Or your dad's introduction, because it does spark curiosity, doesn't it? When you dig into it and you look into it and you go, ooh, okay.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to say is that yourself included, there are some very hardcore, tough Brits. So I think first and foremost, yes, going back 50, 100, 200 years, some of the more adventurous Brits left these shores and explored the world. Mm-hmm. There's still a really proud, hardcore element to people in the UK as well, which has kept British military right up there as some of the best in the world, arguably the best in the world in some aspects. So, to your point, yes, what attracted me to the Marines, certainly once I was lucky enough to make it into the Marines, was the like-mindedness and potentially inspiration I could get from some of the UK-based people that I was lucky enough to become friends with and work with in the Marines, who made me realise that there's a massive spread of people in the UK.
Yeah.
Massive spread. Probably not unlike most countries, to be fair. But in the UK particularly, you get that real spread from fairly entitled and mollycoddled and kind of expecting everything to be done for them.
Yeah.
All the way through to the modern day explorers and adventurers from the UK who continue to lead the way and do phenomenal things and incredible expeditions and challenges. And everything in between. And I think that goes back to my earlier point of why I actually like and almost sought out a life that moved me quite regularly between the UK and Africa, which I love as a place as well.
Yeah.
Is because I have huge appreciation for both. So it's interesting actually. It's kind of I've almost attracted into my life a career that allows me to move, and my family as well actually.
Yeah.
They were recently over from Cape Town, where our home base is now, in Scotland, and then we went to Canada where my wife has some family. So we're almost born to be quite a travel oriented family, and maybe that's been passed down through the generations. But I do want to say that I genuinely appreciate different aspects about the UK and South Africa in equal measure.
Yeah. It's different lifestyles entirely, aren't they?
Yeah.
Really. But each has their merit.
Well, the UK has had a strong influence on former British colonies in Africa, as you know, and elsewhere. One of the things that is kind of ironic is one of the reasons my wife and I wanted to move the family base back to South Africa, to Cape Town, was that we felt that the schools were, the kind of private schools are slightly more affordable, and still have the British values that were kind of exported from the UK to the Commonwealth, going back 50 to 100 years, in a more noticeable way than they are perhaps here in the UK.
Yeah.
Which is perhaps a slightly controversial thing to say, but it's an honest thing for me to say. We looked at schools over here, we looked at schools in Cape Town, and one of the big deciding factors to move back was schools that still value competitiveness on the sports field and in the classroom.
Yeah.
Transparency around performance.
Yes.
And that doesn't mean in any way undermining, but just more visible transparency around how your child is progressing.
Yes.
A sense of community and a sense of contribution to those less fortunate.
Okay.
You know, and again, I'm not saying that doesn't happen in the UK by any means, but in South Africa, there's such a stark difference between haves and have-nots, and a massive level of unemployment and poverty.
Yep.
And so children grow up with that quite clearly visible around them.
Yeah.
And there's an opportunity to play a part in making a difference, or at the very least, having a very tangible, visceral understanding of what poverty looks and feels like around you.
Yeah.
The other thing which I'd say is the UK is a very advanced, developed country, whereas a country like South Africa, where the family is based now, it's a developing country. And so things that you take for granted in the UK, like, for example, a social system that provides a health service, provides a pension, it provides care for those that don't have work or unemployed, or for those when they reach retirement.
Yeah.
That's less available in South Africa or Zimbabwe. So one of the things that you grow up very aware of is that if you're not entrepreneurial, or if you don't have a go-getter type of attitude, get after it, then there's no backup. No one's coming to look after you. There's no open bank check that's going to bail you out. And in some ways, we wanted to have that slightly higher degree of productive tension for our kids.
Okay.
The UK is great in that it's relatively safe, relatively secure, relatively advanced, and relatively insulated with that social support when you're struggling, and that's fantastic. But it can breed a degree of comfort and complacency in the world.
Yes.
And I guess we're lucky enough to have forged experience in the UK and a degree of business in the UK. So I will say that's of course a key responsibility of parents is to have line of sight to look after your family, of course. But there was something about the opportunity to educate the kids in a place where some of the old school British values are more accessible, but also some of the challenges of the developing world are more visible. More visible and tangible. So yeah.
Yeah, I'm kind of envious of the old school values being upheld because they've been eroded here.
I agree. Yeah.
That saddens me.
Yeah.
Because I think it's kind of helping to develop a lack of credibility as a nation on a global platform. They're kind of taking a fucking big leap here.
Yeah.
But but I think that on that level of values, I think we're being driven into the deck
Yeah.
And I don't like it. I'm not happy with that.
Yeah. No, there's some significant challenges, aren't there?
Yeah.
You know,
really shitty leadership.
Yeah.
And some fucking disastrously bad decisions been made.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's difficult to, you know, I'm not a political pundit, but you try and break it down to its most basic level, don't you? And I agree with you. It's like, when you look around, the lack of decisiveness, the lack of decision making, courageous decision making, has been absent for a long time now in Western politics, from what I can see.
Yeah.
And then also appeasing, what we call the left, but let's just simplify this. The degree to which we cater to every single voice, I think, detracts from a degree of cohesive forward progress on matters about which a large majority agree. So we end up diving down a bunch of rabbit holes to keep some extreme mindsets and minorities happy.
Yes.
To the detriment of what the UK government and the UK policy generally endorses as correct. So there's a huge opportunity cost, I believe, to pacifying and listening to some of the voices of unreason.
Yes.
And I wonder to what degree that undermines the UK security, economy, and position in the world. I really do.
Well, it's yeah. I don't think we're doing ourselves any. Well, it's not us. It's the succession of showers of shit in Parliament that have.
Here's something for you. Here's something for you. A bit like teachers, I'm actually not convinced there's sufficient incentive for the brightest and best in the UK, but could be anywhere in the West, to go into politics.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily believe that they get paid what they should if they are doing a proper job of leading this country.
Agreed.
When you look at the salaries of prime ministers, key government positions, it's actually surprising how level those are with relatively mid-level management roles in other industries, like the energy sector, for example. And a bit like teachers, where you go, when you hear some of the stories of what's happening in the classrooms of government schools these days in the UK, you kind of wonder, is it any wonder that teachers are either leaving or don't really want to stand up to some of the behaviour that they see? Because in terms of what they earn, again, and in terms of how critical a teacher role is to the upbringing and development of our children. Is there anything more important? So I don't know. I just had that thought as you were chatting there, Simon. No, think about teachers and ministers.
Yeah.
Do they get paid enough? Do we attract the right people into those roles?
I don't. Well, clearly not.
Yeah, clearly not. I guess rhetorical question, but so maybe that's something. Maybe that's Simon and Tim to the world. Figure out how to attract the best and brightest.
Yeah. I don't think they get paid enough, and that's why they all dabble elsewhere and then get caught out.
This is it.
So, because it's human nature. If you're not, it's a difficult role. There's no denying that.
Yes, for sure.
Screw that. I wouldn't want to do it.
No, it takes a courageous leader to actually do that role properly. But you're absolutely right on your point about going off and doing other things. I mean, all the after dinner speaking, corporate gigs that ministers have continued to do, largely because they want to earn more money and leverage their position as a celebrity or a popular figure or a well-known person.
Yeah.
So they leverage that to go and do speaking tours, other things, when in fact their role is to lead the country, which is not being done to the level it should be. But if you trace that back to root cause and to source, as I say, if you're coming out of school, you're a high flyer, go through uni, and you're looking at your options, let's be brutally honest, a key consideration is how much you get paid, the commercial consideration, obviously. And if you kind of look at it, you look at the upside and the downside, the pros and the cons of all the different job options that are open to you as a really capable, aspirant young man or woman choosing a career. Why would you choose politics?
Yeah, it's a fucking mess.
It's a mess. And do the pros outweigh the cons? What's the reward for putting your head above the parapet and actually speaking up and speaking out? Well, might get stabbed in the street.
Yes.
As has happened, sadly.
Yep. In
many places. You're going to get shot down, shouted down.
Yeah.
Shot at, as we saw in the States recently.
Indeed.
I don't know the answer, but those are potential considerations.
Well, yeah, I think so, because because I think it's that, in my humble little opinion, has helped to drift things away from public service. They're not public servants anymore. They're self-serving, and this is we see and hear this day after day. It's not anything new, but they used to be more public servant minded, and I don't believe they are now. They certainly don't demonstrate that. I was chatting with somebody. Who was I talking to? Anyway, it doesn't really matter. But there's like a hierarchy of politics. In the bottom of this triangle, you've got hearts and minds, because the people at that grassroots level out there in the constituencies doing the day-to-day public serving stuff are bloody good politicians.
Yes.
They're doing sometimes the hardest work, that public facing piece, actually in person.
Yeah.
Really hard work.
Yeah. And
challenging. And then you kind of go up the levels, and as you start to go up levels, it's mostly hearts and minds, then it becomes more minds, then it becomes minds and turds, and then there's just only turds at the top, because shit floats to the top.
Yeah. Yeah.
This was somebody else's theory, not mine. But I'm wholly behind it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I can't see anything wrong with that, to be honest.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because you can't. I think. I've been very impressed with Johnny Mercer.
Mm-hmm.
I think he's done an awful lot to further, the veterans case and to make changes, and I think he's been given, delivered a huge disservice by many veterans by not allowing them, for some reason, thinking that when he says he's going to do something, it's going to happen the next day.
Mm-hmm.
It takes time, because he's got to work with the powers that be above him.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I think he appeared to be towing the party line towards the end more. But he was still, at the same time, still kicking back and saying, no, fuck off. This is what I'm doing. This is what I said I'm going to do.
Yes.
But I think he's had to toe the party line more and more as he's gone on, as he in that position. And I think, the world needs a few more mavericks.
You just said something there which is so simple and yet so important. He wanted to do what he said he would.
Yes.
And that, funny old thing, that very basic value, which, as you know, is kind of called quality assurance. There's these quality assurance audits which companies have, and I quite like the simplicity. It's say what you do what you say, and provide evidence of that. So that's what auditors are looking for when they come into your organisation. They look at your well management system, performance management system, safety management system, as you know. And they say, right, okay, so show us your policy or your system explanation, and then provide evidence that you're actually following that. Simple.
Yes.
Not necessarily easy, but absolutely spot on. And so what I like about what you said about Johnny Mercer is, I would like to think, largely based on his kind of military background, brought in a level of honesty and congruency to say, okay, I've done an assessment, I've listened to the frontline, hearts and minds. And that's always the first step, I think, is don't make any assumptions that you know better than the people you're serving. Ask them, listen to them.
Yes.
So point one, listen to those that you've got the privilege to lead. So 1. 2, having listened to them, rank and prioritize, potentially with those that you're supporting, a sequence of priorities which are realistic, feasible, affordable, etc. So, and fair enough, certain things are not easy to get in place, and it's important to just be transparent about that.
Yeah.
And again, this is leadership 101. People don't like bullshitters or smoke and mirrors. So just be brutally honest about, these are the things we've heard. This is a wish list. From the wish list, we can actually get a pick list of items that we can achieve.
Yeah.
And then, this is the courage part, is as a servant leader, say to those that you're privileged enough to lead, okay, I've listened to you, I've discussed with you what's feasible based on various factors, and we believe collectively that the following 5, whilst not easy, are achievable and will greatly help the community.
Yes.
And then get after it and provide regular updates on how we're progressing against those agreed goals. To be honest, if you follow that relatively simple, but I'm not saying easy, formula.
The concept is simple.
And the values are there, and people believe in that. And then Johnny Mercer as an example, and perhaps other leaders in the past. This is where they slowly but surely earn respect from those that they're supporting and from others who see a degree of congruence in what is said and then what is done, and then evidence to back that up. And I think that if only we could return to that level of simple honesty and congruency and courageous leadership, which works for small teams and all the way up to countries, I believe. And unfortunately, and I do understand that there are so many banana skins in this day and age, including the fact that social media and its algorithms are set up to provide any number of trip hazards along the way. And I'm not saying it's easy, but if you can look yourself in the mirror and stick to that potentially simple formula of say what you intend to do what you said you would, and then continually provide evidence to those that you're lucky enough to serve that you're making progress on that. If we could get that at scale, that behaviour at scale across the UK or across the world, wouldn't we be in a much better place?
Yeah, I absolutely can't find an argument with that. I think it just, and again, it's that KISS principle, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
You know,
absolutely.
Making shit unnecessarily complicated.
And so easy in this day and age. I mean, let's be honest. We were laughing earlier. It's hard to keep up with digital, and other technical progress in the world today. There's so much happening, and it's happening at the speed of light.
Yeah.
And it would be easy to get caught up in that chaos. But I think what's more important than ever is to kind of press pause and return to simple steps and simple values, simple principles. What works? What do you know works for you? And be authentic about that. I think that's the other thing that I would say about leadership at any level. Don't try and be someone else. Don't put a mask on and pretend to be someone else. Just be who you are. Be vulnerable. Be honest about your shortcomings, your weaknesses.
Yes.
Look for help from those who can plug those gaps.
100%.
Because again, what is the thing that turns us off most quickly from a so-called leader is when you can see that they're not being honest, authentic, true to themselves, and you can just see there's the facade, There's a mask. I mean, it doesn't work in our background in the military. You get pinged immediately.
Oh,
absolutely immediately. You'll get found out in a heartbeat. And to be honest, there's no recovering from that. It was very difficult. So we kind of understand that, because it really is, in order to survive, you have to be genuine and authentic and honest about your shortcomings, because otherwise, if you pretend to be something you're not, you'll be found out at the first hurdle, and then to try and regain that respect it's almost impossible. And yet it seems to be a lesson that's still to be learnt by the majority of our political leadership, who, and you see it in the US now, and you've seen it in the UK recently, we say a bunch of stuff to win an election, or to try and win an election, and then weeks later we start discovering the truth about what's really going to be the approach.
Yes.
And
aren't we
what doesn't that just immediately just damage any residual possible respect that you might have had? So, for example, if you say we're not going to put taxes up, that's absolutely not what's going to happen. And then within weeks you start reading, well, we didn't know this and that, and well, we're discovering this and that, so now we might have to put up, and you're just like, okay, so pretty much at the first thing that might be done is the thing that was probably the reason you were voted in. Yeah. Because you were actually going to look after the working man on the street.
Yeah. No.
So.
Absolutely not.
So yeah. Yeah.
I'm going to backtrack a little bit.
Yeah.
Because you mentioned in reference to Johnny Mercy talking about taking things from the military.
Yeah.
This is one of the things I really wanted to talk to you about today. I didn't expect to get into politics. That was a fucking random
diversion.
Yeah. We digress.
Yeah. Back on track.
But really interesting. Very interesting. My head's kind of is from. I mean, there's questions within a question here.
Mm-hmm.
So, the skills you learned as a leader within the Royal Marines, and how you applied that in that environment. How much of that did you take with you? Did you kind of like up sticks and just, like a plug and play, take all of it with you and then filter stuff out, or were you given tips and advice and it won't work, that you can't do these things, these aren't in this way, you have to do it, or was it just to kind of fuck around and find out?
The latter, probably. In honesty, it's a great question, because as Steve Jobs said, the dots always join up looking back.
Yeah.
But not necessarily looking forward. Then you just have to kind of trust your gut, trust your intuition, and choose a path that feels authentic and right for you. So to answer your question, Simon, I mean, I guess we embody what we learn, especially at a young age. So for both you and me, having spent time in the Marines, we probably, without even thinking about it, subconsciously absorbed and embodied what we learned, and how to survive and thrive in a military environment. You learn the best way to do that, and some of that we've touched on already, and that's around being authentic. It's about congruency, and it's about leading by example and leading with courage, and earning the respect of those that you're privileged to serve. So it's all that good stuff, which you realise that in order to be successful in your role, you have to learn fast and embody and adapt and improvise and all that good stuff. So to answer your question, in terms of then leaving the military, I think one of the good things that I've been very lucky in my life, in my opinion, to have been advised by some good friends and family members at critical points in my life.
Okay.
So as I was approaching 5, 6, 7 years in the Marines and making that decision about whether I wanted to stay in for a full career or bang out after a short extended career, kind of 8 years, I was in touch with some school friends who had recently done the MBA at the business school in Cape Town.
Okay.
And it represented to me quite an opportune way to get the student experience, which I hadn't experienced because I joined the Marines straight after school pretty much.
Yeah.
So it's not something that I worried about, but I felt like I'd missed that student experience.
Yeah, okay.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Just that kind of not too much responsibility, but equally an academic challenge, as well as a bit of fun. So it kind of appealed to me when my friends mentioned it, and what really appealed was that having not done an undergrad degree, the opportunity to perhaps catch up with my peers, or at least not feel that I was behind the eight ball, leaving the military and then trying to figure out what I was going to do.
Okay.
It just kind of represented to me an opportunity to kill more than one bird with that stone. It was like, okay, I can have some fun, I can learn some stuff, and I can get a master's qualification, which gives me credibility going to look at the marketplace. So that was some of my rationale for heeding the advice from friends.
Yep.
It wasn't an easy decision to make, not to stay on in the Marines and do a full career, but I just felt that for me, many of the reasons for which I decided to join and been lucky enough to get in and spend the time in the Marines were likely to diminish as I got slightly older. I'd probably be driving a desk, which I could do in City Street anyway. And I also felt a calling back to Africa, I guess, in the blood. And as I said earlier, I've always had that. I've always enjoyed the combination of my connection to the two places. So having done almost 10 years through the 90s in the Marines, it was like, okay, opportunity to get back to Africa, to learn something new and to harness transferable skills. So during that year, to come back to your question, having done the core courses during the first half of the MBA and kind of scraped through some of those courses which were not familiar to me, like stats and finance and accounting and stuff like that. So that was kind of a nice steep learning curve. But once we got into the electives, where you get to choose what courses you pursue in the second half of the year, I was naturally drawn to some of the courses that related to experience as a leader in the Marines. So there was advanced leadership, there was a collaboration and human resources, organizational development type of elective. There was a communication and global marketing kind of elective. So there were a number of electives that I could choose that intuitively felt right for me and that appealed because I felt, okay, I feel like I've got something to offer and I've got some experience that I can explore and see how that applies to the commercial world. And really glad that I did, because I realized just how fortunate we are in the Marines with some of what we just naturally learn about motivation, communication, leadership, teamwork, team building. And I realized sort of during that second half of that year that there's also a commercial opportunity to be a consultant offering expertise in that space, which is a value proposition that organizations will pay for and desperately need support with. So I guess the final part of your question is, how to what degree did I have to sort of suck it and see? I'd say to a relatively high degree, because it's one thing saying, okay, you can see how the theory of what you know from your military background can apply as a reasonable value proposition, but then you have to tailor it massively, don't you? You know this as well. We have a totally different, it's the same language, it's the English language, but the way of communicating in the military and our expectations of how others receive our communication is totally different.
Yes.
to the commercial world, and that's even in the UK, let alone in South Africa. So I think that was where the biggest adjustment came, and I would say it took me several years to find my feet, applying really valuable lessons learnt from a military background, leadership, team building, into commercial speak and into language that was accessible to a workforce from a marketing company or a bank or even I think this is why I was drawn towards the heavy industries that were more male dominated and more high risk, high complexity, dare I say it, high ego type environments. Because actually that, as you can imagine, aligned much more with the background that I was used to from the Marines.
Yes.
So working with kind of mining teams, and then indeed, of course, oil and gas, and the energy sector, I found that was a more natural fit to the experience that I gained as a leader in the Marines. So it definitely wasn't straightforward, and we talked before about reflecting on lessons learned from that transition from the military into the commercial world. It's not easy. I think that's probably the first point I would say to any young, and I do meet youngsters. I'm lucky enough to get a few youngsters referred to me or reach out to me on various platforms because they are leaving the Marines or the military, and they are interested in different perspectives on how to make the transition, and any advice that you might have, and so it might not be what someone wants to hear, but it's probably the most honest advice you can give them straight off the bat is it's not going to be easy. And then if it is, then that's exceptional and that's great. But it's a lonely journey. One of the things we're very blessed with in the military, as you know better than most, is you're surrounded by friends, people who'd lay down their life for you, so the level of friendship and comradeship and support and trust is almost unbeatable anywhere else. And of course that's not necessarily as accessible and available. So you leave that family and you realize that you might be somewhat lonely on this journey into a new job. Depending on your real family and how available they are and other friends that might be around you. So it's lonely. I think definitely draw on the mindset, but you have to adapt the mindset. So the mindset in the military is, find a way over that wall. Either on your own or with your mates. And you get over that wall, whether it's over, around, through, underneath, whatever. You achieve your mission, but it's a different kind of mission to the mission of finding a job outside the military, as you know. It's a different kind of mission to achieve. It's less physical and more emotional, psychological. It requires. It also requires, as you know, resilience and perseverance. But the knockbacks that you get are not like, you're trying to break down a door and it doesn't break the first time you run into it, so then you have to charge at it a few more times and eventually, you get through the door. It's more about you've got to knock on doors, to, I guess, continue the analogy. You got to kind of knock on doors, you've got to pick up the phone, you've got to meet people, you've got to network, you've got to submit your CV, you've got to rewrite and adapt your CV. Every time. So, I guess, the advice I give people is it's not going to be easy, but one of the things you can draw on is your military experience of never give up, never quit, and I think probably the second thing, which follows very closely to the first of realizing it'll be tough, is learn to know thyself. Because again, in the military, we kind of don't really confront that. We just conform. We kind of go in and there's a training routine and there's a regimental routine, and we fit in and we survive to thrive. And then we get to know that ecosystem and we thrive. We come out, it's a totally different environment, and we think we know ourselves, but we only know ourselves in that different environment.
Yeah.
So now it's almost back to the drawing board, back to the whiteboard.
Absolutely.
So I would advise people to invest in themselves a little bit. So whether it's personality testing, whether it's a degree of psychological confrontation, experience, coaching, awareness, find out about yourself in a different context, understand your skills, understand your weaknesses, understand your strengths, understand what the marketplace is looking for. Jim Collins, who wrote the book Good to Great and Built to Last, he talks about the hedgehog concept, which I quite like, again, because it's simple. So it's a Venn diagram which overlap in the middle, and the three components of that are: what are you good at? What does the market need? And can it drive your economic engine?
Mm-hmm.
So in order for you to hit the sweet spot in the middle of that Venn diagram, you need those circles to overlap.
Yeah.
So there's no point choosing something that you're really passionate about, but it's got absolutely no interest to anyone else. You can have that as a hobby, or something you do in your own time, by all means.
Yeah.
But rather pick something else that you are passionate about or good at, that the market is interested in.
Yeah.
You know, so going back to my point about leadership, team building, etc. You find industries that do need that, and you're passionate about that. Great, you've got an overlap there. But then equally, that third circle, can it drive the economic engine? Is it going to allow you to earn money to look after your family, put food on the table, a roof over your head, a holiday once a year, all that good stuff? Because again, if you're coming out of the military just thinking, there's a demand, but actually the demand is like pretty much for charity or like voluntary stuff. Great, good for you. You're making a contribution to society, but you won't be able to look after your family if it's all voluntary work. So if your passion is maybe coaching or counselling, great. There will be a demand for it, but you need to find a way of earning money doing that as well. As much for your self-esteem as for survival, etc. So, I don't know, those are some of my thoughts. Don't know if that resonates for you.
Yeah, there's a lot I recognise in there.
Good and bad.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, this is the thing, when you leave, nobody tells you really what to expect or how things are.
I think it's improved, but yeah.
But it is. It's just fuck around and find out.
Yeah.
This is something I just found out when I set up that Veterans Mental Health Charity. It turned out there was an identifiable 2.5 to 3 year blip. Okay. For people when they leave. You know, whether they've had any kind of mental health issues beforehand or not. It was across the board. Right. You leave, and you either start your own business or you work for a company. Yeah. And it's head down, arse up. Yeah. And you're ploughing on, trying to fit in, and then at this 2.5 year point, and it's 2.5 to 3 years, it was consistent. Okay. Pop your head above the parapet, and you get kind of like a bit of a meerkat. Right, where the fuck am I? Yeah. What am I doing? Yeah. Who am I? Yeah. The fuck is going on? Yeah. And there's all this stuff going on, and people have a blip and a bit of a wobble. Yeah. Most people catch themselves, and partly with their new friends and their family. They go, Jesus Christ! Right, I need to adjust here. Yeah. I need to make some changes here, or do something else, or whatever. Yeah. And then they go, right, okay, back on even. Is that right? On. That's interesting, isn't it? That's interesting. Some people, you kind of have that dip, but then never really get out of it. Okay. And they kind of do this steps all the way down to the bottom. Yeah, sad. Yeah. So this is, and the other thing, and I'll get your thoughts on this one, is the stubborn determination to fucking succeed at all costs. Mm-hmm. I see that because we don't like to lose. Yeah. Has it ever happened to you where you've kind of you've been banging away at something, right, it will fucking work. but then had to do that kind of take that tactical pause, and rather than you as a human being kind of taking casualties, as it were, because you're under fire.
Yeah.
And then, really and then having to kind of, okay, I need to withdraw, or I need to flank, or I need to call in assets of some sort.
Yeah.
That test and a joke.
Smoke.
Yeah. Pop smoke, but not straight out the middle. Pop smoke, fuck off.
Yeah.
Because there's I hear this all the time, and I've done this as well. I've been guilty. I've screwed this up.
Yeah, we all
numerous times.
Yeah. It's a pro and a con, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It's a fine balance, because it's not until after you've kind of got blood dripping down your face because you've been smashing into that wall repeatedly, and you're like, Jesus, that hurts. Then you go, what am I doing?
Yeah, it's a great question and point. So the answer is yes, definitely I have failed and bumped into the proverbial wall and had to withdraw and reconsider. No question. I'd be an absolute liar if I sat here and said anything different. And I've grappled with it, because you're right, it's infused in us in the military, particularly the Marines. Don't quit. Achieve the mission.
Yeah.
Pretty much any way possible.
Yeah.
Not so much don't show weakness, but have the strength to get to the end of the 30 miler, the end of the endurance course, trials and solve, the speed marches, the selections that you do, the courses that you do. It's driven into you that maybe failure is not an option, or certainly quitting is not an option.
Yeah.
It's very much part of the DNA that you actually need, really, to even to just get into the Marines. You have to have a degree of grit. That's actually probably the most important thing that you're looking for in someone who's looking to join the Marines.
Yeah.
I was lucky enough to kind of be part of those kind of selection teams looking at young officers and young recruits coming in. So we're well aware of key attributes of what you need just to get in, let alone what's then infused into you. So you're right. Is it any wonder that we then go into Civvy Street commercial world with that baggage, which is also an incredible asset. So it's a great asset. I 100% agree. It's an asset to
hugely so.
To keep going, to have a determination to succeed, to be resilient, to have grit. However, I like what you're asking, Simon. It's a good point, because one of the things we are guilty of, I'm guilty of, was even after it was blindingly obvious that something wasn't working, and this applies to relationships, it applies to potential business ventures, it applies to travel considerations. I would blunder on because out of a sort of misaligned aspiration or expectation that I should see that through to conclusion, and yet no question it was the wrong thing to do. Rather than saying time out, pause, reassess, learn the lessons, accept, and accept. You don't have to call it defeat, but accept wrong choice, wrong route to the target, wrong direction of travel. There's nothing wrong with admitting that. And actually, I've learned over time, there's nothing wrong with accepting and admitting failure. There's nothing wrong with I won't say quitting, but there's nothing wrong with stopping your direction of travel if it becomes abundantly clear that you're heading the wrong direction. It sounds obvious.
Yes.
But it's not as easy to admit that.
No, it's really hard.
And so in terms of examples, after my MBA, I started a business which was kind of following my passion of working with professional sports teams, particularly the Springboks, or at least the South African rugby setup. And I was lucky enough to do that at a sort of entry level, so working with some of the younger age group levels and what they call the green and gold squads that were feeders into the main Springbok setup.
Yeah.
I was lucky enough to work briefly with the likes of Brian Habana, Farid Dupriya, and a few others, where whether it was a presentation or running a breakaway weekend for those guys when they were very young going into the Springbok setup, it was about mental toughness, mental skills development, team building, giving them some reference points away from the rugby pitch about how to be a more rounded individual and leader, and bring some of the transferable learning that we were lucky enough to get from the Marines and pass it on. But it was quite a niche market, and particularly in the developing world, there's not a huge amount of budget for the kind of consulting services that I was offering. So probably for too long I soldiered on, trying to successfully win enough business to make my coaching outfit successful, or at least feasible. And then probably after too long realized, well, no, you need to branch out. You're going to need to work with the commercial world. You're going to need to add to the professional sports arena, which is very small budgets, quite niche, quite saturated, and go out into the more corporate team building environment, which is what I did. Which was one of the best decisions I made, was to branch out, develop the value proposition that I was trying to develop to a much wider spectrum of clientele. So that's an example. I was probably persevered for longer than I should have done with just trying to win professional sports team clients, when actually, should have just stepped back and gone, look, it's fine, you've been lucky enough to have a little bit of an experience there. Meet some great people, work with some great people, future sports stars, etc. But actually, you need to continue your growth and learning by working with a wider variety of clients. So that's definitely an example, and I completely agree with you. I agree with you. It's a pro and a con that you do learn through time served in City Street. That we bring with us a certain armory from the military.
Absolutely.
Which can be a drawback, and you'll know this as much as anyone.
Overplaying your strengths till they become a weakness.
Yeah, and actually putting on a bit of a mask. One of the things that I did was, so 4 or 5 years after the MBA, and having now started consulting and team building, facilitating with a lot of different clients, I realized that to build some credibility, and going back to my much earlier point about slightly obsessive focus, I realized I was drifting a bit. And I was like, right, I need something to focus on, so I booked myself onto a series of professional coaching courses. So sort of gradual progression to become a professional coach, which requires a lot of commitment, as you can imagine, a fair investment of money and time. And during that journey, I got some really confronting and challenging, but immensely valuable and game-changing feedback that I was as much a positive product as a victim of my background. So we tend to wear a mask and a set of armory from our time in the military. Don't show too much. Don't be too vulnerable. Don't show weakness. Don't open up too much. There's a risk if you do that you actually reveal the marshmallow inside, or the true person inside. Or things that scare you in life. All this stuff which you, whether you're taught or you just yourself taught, that you need to put on a bit of a mask as a Marine and be a certain persona, a certain stereotype. And I'm not saying you're taught to do this, it's almost something that you put on as a survival suit in the world. And when I did my coaching course, one of the first things you have to do is really almost reduce yourself to your most vulnerable self. And fantastic coaches that I worked with who ran the course, and peers who were on the course with me who were just as vulnerable and just as on just as steep a learning curve themselves. But yeah, what I realized was I was carrying a lot of baggage and wearing a set of armor, which I needed to strip away in order to be my true self as an adult, as a husband, father, as much as a coach, in order to be effective. So, that's another thing that is difficult to understand and fully embrace when you leave the military, because you feel bulletproof, and
that's true.
And you don't realize that in order to grow further, you need to strip away some of the layers that we've embodied through time, and I think someone like yourself saw a lot more kind of combat and kind of contact than I did. So I think even more so, people that see action, and particularly traumatic action, I think there's even more so a danger, and this is more your area of expertise than mine, but there's even more danger that you lock away some of the traumatic experiences.
Absolutely.
And
yes.
And if you don't confront them or manage them, and again, this is definitely more your area of expertise than mine, there is a risk that it comes back to bite you later in life.
Yeah.
So
it very much can do. Yeah. Yes, there is a lot of research into late onset PTSD.
Right. Yeah.
And with late onset, it can be, you could have had something happen in your 20s, and it's not until you're in your 60s, 70s that it manifests.
Right.
So.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's astonishing.
30, 40, 50 years later.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Quite freaky. So.
Yeah.
Yeah. Stand by, everyone.
Yeah.
What? So you've talked in that kind of that emotional piece, and we've touched on it. You just kind of beautifully encapsulated kind of the whole identity piece.
Yeah.
Which is, and figuring that out after, who you are after the military is quite an emotional little journey in its own way. Quite turbulent.
Yes.
can be.
Yeah, it can be.
What about in terms of going a little bit deeper into the emotional bit? We don't typically in the military deal with the softer emotions. We kind of suppress them because they get in the way.
Yes. Yeah.
How have you found, as a husband and a father and a leader of other people in a completely different environment, in the real world, not in Disney World?
Yes. I love it. Brilliant. Yeah.
Having to tap into those softer emotions and kind of develop an awareness of what they are, how they feel, what impact they have on you in different contexts and situations, and having to learn to manage that piece. How is that?
Wow, that is a great question and a deep subject.
Yeah.
What I will say is that I learned to cry. I learned to cry when I left the Marines. I don't think I did a lot of crying in the Marines.
No.
It was, if I ever came close to it, I probably suppressed it.
Yeah.
Then through a number of setbacks, relationship setbacks, life setbacks, business setbacks, losing my father, losing some friends and family over the years, as happens to all of us.
Yes.
I learned the value of letting it come out, like just having a good cry, just having a really good cry, and it can be a sobbing cry, it can be a cry, it could be tears of joy, and everything in between. So I think that's the first thing that, for whatever reason, jumps out when you ask that question. because it's such a visible and kind of tangible emotional response is actually crying, and I will never say that anyone suppressed or told me I shouldn't cry, although I think my dad did kind of, in a loving way but in his own way, potentially discouraged my brother and I from crying, and I don't blame him for it at all, but I think the generation or generations ahead of us perhaps not always as in touch with the softer side, or perhaps felt compelled to pass the message down that, you know, big boys don't cry.
Yeah.
So I think for whatever reason, I used to suppress emotion more than I do now. So that was definitely a learning, and definitely that the coaching courses that I mentioned were a catalyst and an accelerator to embrace the softer side, particularly crying and being okay with crying if the tears bubble up. My wife and I had real challenges getting pregnant, so got married in 2007. We knew we wanted children. We knew that it wasn't necessarily going to be straightforward based on various sort of medical information that we had some insight. But had no reason to believe that it would be challenging to have kids. And there started quite a long emotional journey of trying to have our first child. We went all the way to IVF. So starting naturally trying to have kids, realizing it wasn't happening, the emotion associated with that, the anger, the frustration, the tension, the conflict. I think all of that, it strips you down and then rebuilds you. Which, whether you like it or not, develops your softer side and your more vulnerable side and your more human side. Kind of goes back to what we were saying. You kind of think you're pretty bulletproof coming out of a military background, thinking that you've seen a lot, you've done a lot, you've achieved a lot, and you have in a very specific environment, which is just a very small part of the world and a bit of life. So it was a long journey to have our first child, Leola. We went through IVF. I think we went through more than one cycle of IVF. We confronted the fact that we might not be able to have children. And it's easy to sit on a couch now and sort of rattle off the chronology, but of course that was at least 2, if not 3 years of pain, frustration, emotion, interspersed with lots of happy times. Don't get me wrong, it's not like I didn't feel like we were in a rut for all that time, but there's that realization that there's no such thing as a perfect life. There's no such thing as life where everything just happens as you want it, when you want it, without any issues. And in hindsight, I'm grateful for the challenge, and I'm certainly very grateful that with the support of some exceptional doctors in Cape Town, we got to the point where we got the formula to work, and we had our first child, Leola. And I guess it's kind of amusing in hindsight, and to encourage anyone else who has to go down the fertility route. Once we kind of knew the formula, we were able to, also with IVF, but we were able to have our next 2 children, without too much drama. So lucky enough to have 3 kids. So to sort of keep to your question, Simon, I think that the soft skills around self-awareness, empathy for your wife, my wife, communication, particularly around the hard stuff, forgiveness and compassion. When a big part of you and in our case, myself and my wife, potentially times where we probably felt maybe we should just walk away from the relationship, walk away from the marriage. It's just so difficult. Everything's tough. You kind of question, why us? Why is this happening? So all of that stuff is actually an opportunity to learn in hindsight, and to develop those very, very vulnerable, very human, soft skills.
Yes.
That have definitely stood me in good stead subsequently, as a husband, as a father, as a Christian, as a coach, and hopefully as a leader of people and a colleague to other people. No question, it's helped me. And it's interesting, a lot of my work in the last 15 plus years has been in the energy sector, upstream oil and gas, working with pretty tough people who do some phenomenal work in tough environments, as you know. High risk, high complexity, challenging work, high cost, etc. And so helping others in those kind of environments to open up and be willing to care and share, communicate effectively, show empathy for others who perhaps haven't delivered what was expected of them. That's been an interesting journey and an opportunity to pass on some of the lessons that I learned through some of the tougher times in my life, to help other leaders build their own soft skills and non-technical skills and kind of human side. And tragedy, let's be honest, tragedy, I defy anyone who loses a close family member to not be forever changed in some way, shape or form. So like everyone, I guess, because like you, like many, the military is a young man's game unless you stay in for a particularly long time. So during your time in the military, yes, you may lose colleagues in combat, and that's a different gig, and I was fortunate to not have that happen to me. So for myself, coming out of the military, I was still in my 20s, hadn't lost any close family members at that stage. So a combination of things. You're very capable in some ways, but you're very vulnerable in others. And then I guess the reality is that life then happens, and what's good is that you can still take those skills that you're good at from your time in the military, which I do believe is a real privilege and a real solid foundation for anyone. So that's the encouragement I would give anyone who comes out of the military into the commercial world. You're hugely privileged. You've been in an ecosystem which has prepared you well to surpass expectations of yourself and of others and deliver excellence. However, you're also vulnerable, and so you're going to realize that things are different. They might not go your way, and indeed, just because you're getting older in life, of course, you're probably going to lose family members. You're going to lose, opportunities, and you're going to have some bad experiences, which is not rocket science, but whether you're prepared for it or not, it's going to happen. And those as you know, that life gives you the test first and the lesson after is one of the best quotes I ever heard.
Roger that.
So the best thing you can do is listen to those older than you through things like this podcast initiative, which I think is fantastic, because for youngsters who actually take the time to listen and pay attention, you can get a lesson before the test, and you can do something about it before the test. So you will lose someone from your family. You will fail in the commercial world one way or another. Prepare yourself for that, even if it's just mentally and emotionally. It won't be such a big shock when it happens.
And have the humility to learn from it. Indeed. So when it's happened, reflect on it and try and take a moment, as you say, to understand what you might do different next time, or
how you might respond or react differently next time.
Yeah. There's those classic 3 questions at debrief, isn't it? Hot debrief. What did we do well? What did we fuck up? If we're going to do it all again, what would we do differently?
Keep it simple. Kiss.
Yeah.
Agreed. And I love, on a lighter note, I love the fact that you mentioned a debrief there, because one of the big things that both of us, no doubt, work with teams on is the principle of an after-action review.
Yeah.
And as you know, and like yourself, I've been on a research journey for the last 3 years, very intense. And I'm social scientist, kind of researching team effectiveness at the front line in the energy sector. And one of the most unanimous pieces of feedback is that everyone knows that review should happen, and for whatever reason, everyone says it doesn't happen. It either doesn't happen at all, or it's paid lip service.
Yeah.
And so, isn't it amazing? We know that review is important.
Yes.
And yet all of us, myself included, guilty, tend to find a way to either not do it, and yet other research has shown that those that are at the top of their respective industries, games, those with the best families, best achievements, have all been almost forensic about journaling, capturing lessons, processing lessons.
Yeah.
The likes of Novak Djokovic, Dan Carter, the top sportsmen and women in their respective sports.
Yeah.
Johnny Wilkinson, these guys, they take the time to watch the footage, listen to feedback, process the feedback, apply a solution for next time.
Yeah.
So it's a differentiator. We know that. Can you be asked to take the time?
That's the thing, isn't it?
That's what it's going to take. You want to go from here to here, it takes deliberate effort.
It eats in the energy sector for offshore or even onshore, just running on shift patterns. There's no interest, or very little interest at the end of a 12-hour shift.
Correct.
To take time out of your time off to do a debrief.
And you almost took the words out of the mouths of the candidates I've been speaking to.
Yeah.
Exactly. So after a 12-hour shift, you're knackered and you're relieved and satisfied that the job's now done, and now it's focused forward. Last thing you want to do is reflect on the last 12 hours, because you're just glad that it's over, and you're knackered and you're hungry and you want to get your head down, and you want to speak to your family, all of which is totally understandable, but they're not mutually exclusive. You can do all of that.
Yes.
You just need to take 15 minutes to capture.
Exactly.
And you know what?
It doesn't take long.
Nominate someone who's going to take someone who's not just on the 12-hour shift to be the one that helps you capture that and get it processed.
Yeah.
So that it can then be addressed. And again, I'm not sitting here saying it's easy. You've been there in the toughest military environments, and yet Premier League players in the military and in other industry, they'll do a patrol debrief at the end of the patrol, and they'll capture the key points. And ideally, you've got an int officer or someone who's there to say, look, all I need from you guys, I know you're knackered, I know you need a shower and something to eat and get your head down. All I need is for you to just talk at me for 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Just talk at me. What did you see at objective 1? What did you see at objective 2? What else did you pick up on the route to and from?
Yeah.
Anything else? If you do think of anything else, you know where to find me. Off you go. 5 minutes.
Yeah. It's
5 minutes of gold, though.
Oh yes, because it's still fresh.
Exactly. That's the other thing, isn't it? Research into the forgetting curve, and into the human factor of memory. How quickly we all know we forget stuff.
Yep.
And it ain't coming back, because your brain is a very, very efficient organ in the body.
Yep. And
it ain't going to retain or hang on to any crap that it feels is now irrelevant, and that includes everything that's now just past, because the brain's like, don't need to waste any calories on that anymore.
No.
I'm now thinking about the next thing.
No, I'm giving an example. Yesterday, I was sat on my computer and I was writing about, and I had this idea, and then my dog barked, so I turned my head back to the computer.
What was the idea?
No idea. Not a clue. It still hasn't come back.
Yeah. Oh man, nightmare. Yeah.
Split second.
Been there.
Like, oh,
Been there.
fucking really?
Even while we were chatting, actually, on this podcast, 20 minutes ago, I nearly lost my train of thought. Thankfully, I'd anchored on that cushion, and I looked at the cushion, and again, it kind of came back into my head. But it's amazing how quickly your brain will just hive off stuff that it feels is now
so
irrelevant.
annoying.
But again, the research is there, the science is there. We know this stuff. I just found it's just a classic example because it's like each person that I spoke to, they know the value, they espouse the value. It's in the system as a management system priority. Do an after action review, and yet to a person, they said it either doesn't happen at all, or we pay absolute lip service to it. It's inconsistent. It may or may not happen, and if it does happen, it may be really poorly done.
Yeah.
Human behaviour. Fascinating.
Yes.
I need a pee, by the way.
We are quirky
and I'm
creatures.
happy to keep that on the podcast. Is that okay? Can I go for?
Yeah, of course you can. Absolutely. Tell you what I'll do.
Are we doing time wise?
What I'll do is I shall. Well, yeah. So after a pause for dinner, which was bloody delicious.
Yeah, it was good.
Without looking back, I can't remember where the fuck we were. Oh, yes, I do. It's actually popped into my head. Talking about emotions.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, in terms of the things that in that transition piece of from what you took from the core into Civvy Street, and what was useful and what wasn't, because we talked about identity and emotions and other skills, but this is one that might bring the biggest smile probably.
Yeah.
Is kind of the behavioural piece of what's appropriate and relevant and applicable within the core.
Yeah.
What did translate across and what didn't, and how did you find out what didn't?
Yeah. I mentioned my kind of MBA year student, and that was actually probably a gap that I needed, because the social activities during that year were definitely an opportunity for me to perhaps kind of inject a bit of difference into some of the social gatherings we had, with sort of fancy dress or some of the sort of bootneck humour that you bring to those kind of party environments. So in that respect, it was probably good that I had that buffer, where you're surrounded by others who were also who'd also been working for 10, 15 plus years in whatever industry, and were also looking to let their hair down and have a bit of a laugh. So in some ways it was quite good, because there was that purge to some extent from the Marines background merging into normal life.
Yeah.
So some of the slightly, some might say, more antisocial behaviour was kind of humorously diffused into a different type of environment. And then I touched on the language. I think we call it bootneck slang, or the kind of slang speak that we have in the military and the Marines. Yes. Which is slightly different. I guess there's a period of realization that you're not now surrounded by other Marines, and therefore people won't necessarily get what you're saying if you don't adapt to.
You have to speak English again.
But it's an interesting one, isn't it? Like, it's funny, but it's also quite interesting, because every culture has their own code. Yes. Even though you might be speaking English, it's the way you structure your sentences. It's it's certain words, trigger words, or action words that are the subtle nuance of different cultures.
Yes.
So that was a piece. In terms of behaviours, otherwise, it's as we touched on earlier, and as you know, Simon, it's a fairly specific environment that you're prepared for and that you kind of interact in when you're in the military. So your behaviour is oriented towards a fairly male-dominated environment, and often a far-flung sort of operating environment, or on board, say, HMS Ocean, travelling somewhere or whatever. So kind of a ship's environment. So again, different environment. So there's no question that means that you have to change your behaviour, your language, your mindset to adapt. And then probably behaviours like behaviours that were important and encouraged in the Corps, which translate well to leadership in other environments. I think those are good. So, discipline, punctuality, loyalty, behaviours around showing up, being present, presentable, involved, engaged, volunteering to help if there's an opportunity, getting stuck in, behaviour like being part of the team, stuff that second nature from the military. Definitely that stands you in good stead, no question. Possibly in slightly more diverse environments that are perhaps slightly alien or slightly different to what you're used to, would be a steeper learning curve coming out of the military, as you would know, like sort of diversity in terms of gender, in terms of ethnicity, demography. You might find yourself in a different industry, in a diverse environment that does feel quite different and arguably a bit uncomfortable from a military background. Yeah. And there, I guess you're having to try and temper your behaviour or adopt a slightly more retired behaviour to observe and to try and understand how you might fit in to that new environment, that new culture. So and definitely that affects your confidence and your your perspective on where you fit in. I can definitely remember that. If I think back to that period, call it 5 years. 5 years after leaving the Marines and immersing into the commercial world, the civvy world, and different types of work, there are definitely times where you feel quite vulnerable, feel quite inadequate, feel quite unprepared, and ill-equipped to add value in certain...
Which is quite alien.
Yes,
isn't it? Really?
Correct, because you're used to being like, okay, I know my role, I know the role that I need to play, and that's getting stuck in and getting involved, etc. You're right, it's quite alien. You suddenly find yourself in an environment where you feel like, well, maybe I shouldn't say anything here, and I'm not sure there's anything I can do, but I feel like a spare part because I kind of, there's an expectation that I am here, but what am I actually doing to add value? And if that's just for, say, a short workshop, it's not too bad, is it? But what's worse is if it's maybe part of your job or a longer term thing where you maybe turning up daily and thinking, okay, well, I've been employed here for a certain role which I don't quite understand. It's very different to what I was used to in my former life.
Yeah.
And I don't feel like I'm adding much value. That is, as you say, it's a difficult environment to try and accept, and you do start questioning whether you should be there, and that's difficult for a former Marine or military person, I think, because you associate. It's like, it's a good question you asked about behaviour, because behaviour in the military is quite active. It's quite physical. You know, it normally involves sort of carrying a weapon and a bergen and some webbing and kind of moving from A to B, or even if you're on some transport, you're kind of going somewhere, you're moving, you're doing something.
Yeah.
Civvy world, commercial world, you're often sitting at a desk or in a meeting, and that in itself is quite a change of scenery.
Yeah.
And quite a challenge in itself.
I don't know how you've found this, because you've worked in the energy industry, which is a bit more hardline, but there's the military is very direct. They don't like grey in terms of giving orders and instructions. Everything is very clear and concise, isn't it?
Yeah, it's true.
To avoid any ambiguity.
Mm-hmm.
So everybody's clear on their role, they're clear on the purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing that the concept of two-up intent is lacking in the civvy world.
Yes.
Which
that's a very polite way of putting it, especially from you.
Well, I do try.
You had a brief, polite interlude there.
Yeah.
It's fucking awful, I think. Is
entirely lacking. Useless fucks.
Yeah.
There we go. Back to normal.
Yeah.
Normal services resumed.
Yeah. No. Look.
And I think that lacks that. That's why people can have that lack of purpose and don't feel where they understand where they fit in, because they don't know the bigger picture, because nobody bloody tells them.
Yeah, it's a massive gap. It's where do you start on that one? Like, because I agree, and yet, so on the one hand, you kind of go, well, it's not the military, so you think, well, maybe it's different, right? But actually, like, I agree with what you just said there. And why don't we see and expect better leadership in terms of two-up, commander's intent, mission command, understanding, two down. Right, there's autonomy. I can act within boundary, but I fully understand what we're collectively trying to achieve here.
Yes.
And I'm well briefed. I feel well briefed. I feel very clear on my role within this bigger organisation. And that is so massively lacking, isn't it? There's no question. But in fairness to industry outside of military, I have seen the opposite of that. I have seen some excellent examples, some rig environments where it's very clear what the two-up intent is.
Yes.
And as a result, the team is in high performance mode. It's fantastic. Organisations that I've worked in and work in now, where in general we try and deliver a degree of what you've just described, clarity from the top, disseminated down so that people understand what's actually going on.
Yeah.
There's always room for improvement, no question. But I think, where you're absolutely spot on is, through the 25 years or so since I've been outside the Corps, different clients that I've worked with, to be fair, mainly outside the energy sector, although there are definitely some within, but different clients, different industries where, quite frankly, the level of leadership, the level of communication is absolutely appalling. In fact, it's absent. It's just not there. And as a result, it's chaos. It's this, demoralized workforce, uncertain, anxious, unclear about the future, and therefore nothing like a real team. They're just a sort of disparate group of individuals who happen to cohabit the same building. But other than that, are nowhere close to being a team. And it's tragic. It's tragic. You know, it's a net lose for everyone. Because commercially they won't be doing well.
Yeah.
People aren't happy. The shareholders and stakeholders at the top can't be happy. So yeah, you do wonder. It's quite frightening, actually. The spread that you see, isn't it? It really is.
Yeah, I mean, some companies and some industries do it really well.
Yes. Yeah.
Phenomenally well.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah, the word needs to spread. Share the love.
Yeah.
It's funny because you led those things in a direction that my mind was already thinking. You talk about demoralised and anxious and etc. I was thinking, how in your experience, how is that kind of, with my kind of clinical therapist head on, how have you seen that's affected the mood and the mindset and the mental health of people within those teams and those environments?
Well, look, as you know, Simon, I mean, similar to yourself, very close to my heart, particularly the concept of mood set, which I did a TED talk on, which was actually just a word that jumped out at me genuinely when I was trying to think about what message I wanted to share. So I'm glad you asked that question, because a big thing for me, for whatever reason, going back to school days, maybe based on some of what I observed through the military and beyond, one of my triggers is any kind of bullying. If I see any kind of bad treatment, maltreatment, bullying particularly, it just really presses my button. And you know, I just can't help but sort of want to confront it or want to defend victims of it, or call it out. I just want to call it out because it's just so unnecessary.
Yes.
And so when you ask about that, like my TED talk touched on an experience and an example of really poor leadership and how that can influence the mood, the atmosphere on a rig. And for anyone who doesn't know, you know, you think about a rig environment, you're talking about a floating drill ship or semi-sub, deep water, offshore land. So you've got like a little community, nowhere to go unless the chopper's taken them on or off. Everyone has to work together, and therefore it's so critical that there's a level of respect, there's a level of communication, and all of that is led by leadership, as we know.
Yes.
So it's bad enough having one sort of bad toxic apple in the barrel who's one of the team members, but when you've got a really toxic leader, either on the rig or even worse, if it's kind of like the overarching leader of the project, including the rig, the negative impact and influence that can have is massive. Thankfully, it doesn't happen often, because thankfully we've become better at selecting the right leaders for the right reasons with the right skill set. Sadly, however, it can happen, and I've definitely seen when that's happened. And to come back to your question, it has a massive impact on the morale and the mood set of the team. People are anxious, they're uncertain, they don't know what they're going to be in trouble for next. And even just that fact that they are like looking over their shoulder, worried because they're going to be criticized or admonished for doing something. That's distracting them from what they should be doing. So even just that in itself is making a dangerous environment, as you know, because people are now distracted. They're not focused on what they should be, which is going to lead more likely to some kind of incident or accident. So as a start. But secondly, they're just no longer enjoying their work environment. And research, as I touched on in my talk, research has shown that happier workers are more productive workers. It's not rocket science. It doesn't mean to say that, you know, we should all be happy clappy in the work environment, and that's just going to drive profit in the company. It's not the case.
No.
We all know that, right? But we're talking about just at a sensible level. So respect, sense of humour within reason, cheerfulness, camaraderie, clearly defined goals and roles within the team, and a clear methodology for achieving those goals together. That's what pulls the team together. That's what keeps people happy. Being treated fairly, having their welfare looked after. So in a rig environment, that's everything from the food to the accommodation to the recreational spaces, to the ability to communicate home, to a bond or a tuck shop with some chocolate if they want. All the way through to tidy, clean environment, reasonable expectation on work time versus rest time, and all that good stuff. And so, coming back to your question, yes, I've seen in different environments how poor leadership can very quickly lead to highly disillusioned, disenfranchised, demoralized workforce. And indeed worse, and again, this sort of starts to touch on some of your experience and observation, like, depression, team members feeling that they are the ones who are letting the team down. So even worse than depression, almost self-dislike, a sense of, it's my fault. Again, often unfair, often just because a poor leader or a toxic leader is turning team members against someone just because of a personal dislike. But it's a big one for me, I guess. Bullying behavior is a key touch point, trigger for me, and then the importance of servant leadership is a big one for me as well. Like creating the right work environment, creating the right atmosphere, creating the conditions and context within which your team can unlock their potential. It's kind of the work that I've been involved in, for the best part of the last 20, 25 years since I left the Corps. It's that kind of work, and it's trying to help leaders to embrace that, to acknowledge that, to understand that. It doesn't come naturally to all leaders, but I've worked with some great leaders who are more naturally the sort of directive style, autonomous, autocratic type of leadership. Autocratic, probably is a better way of putting it. So autocratic sort of directive leadership, and yet bright leaders who go, okay, well, I'm keen to learn, and maybe I am too direct, so how could I become a better leader? And absolutely embrace the opportunity to learn how to build soft skills, non-technical skills, empathy, the importance of building a personal relationship with team members, because we're all different. We all respond in different ways. We are motivated in different ways. So I've been privileged to coach and work with some incredible leaders onshore and offshore who absolutely recognize that they are almost a product of the environment that worked when they were coming up through the ranks. But with the millennials coming through and Generation Z now, you have to adapt your style of leadership to suit the different culture that's coming through. But I've also sadly come across uncoachable leaders who are natural bullies. They're very directive and they're unwilling to change. And, good luck to them. My prediction is that in many cases, at some point, what goes around comes around. And they'll either fall foul of the mistrust that they're creating in their environment, or worse, they'll be moved on by either their own leadership, who will see that their behaviours are poor, or their own team. And this is what some toxic leaders forget. It's called mutiny. And there's plenty of examples in history.
Yes, indeed.
And you don't have to be captain of a ship to have a mutiny. It can happen anywhere where the team just decide, no, not working for that guy anymore, so we'll down tools. And in some ways they don't have to do, when teams figure it out, They don't have to do much for the leader to be massively exposed.
Not at all. No.
So it's an interesting topic, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean it's a labyrinth.
Yes. Yeah. 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 It's such a link, isn't it? Like leadership and welfare, morale. I think it's probably one of the learnings that you don't even have to think too much about, because it just becomes so blatantly bleeding obvious if you're in, say, the Marines. And it comes back to one of your questions earlier. Like, it's probably one of the things that you naturally adopt, and then you take it with you, and for you it's intuitive, because you know that the machine doesn't work without that kind of awareness in a military type environment. And so yes, it's surprising when you get to maybe certain other industries and notice that it's not as intuitive, or it's not as consistent. And there's some obvious reasons for that, I guess. It's if you work in a reasonably comfortable environment and the decisions are really just about a spreadsheet. And I'm not saying that numbers aren't critical. Of course they are. Commercials and numbers are absolutely critical for the success of a business, but it's still, you're still leading people. Leadership is about people. It's about how people feel. It's about how people are respected, trusted, communicated with. And coaches, consultants, in my view, will never be out of business. Good ones, because it's always going to be there.
Yeah, as long as human beings, we are the weakest link.
We are the weakest link. And that whole, and it's tricky, isn't it? Like the Peter principle, where people are promoted beyond their leadership capability.
Yes.
You can see how it happens. You get excellent technicians, or very bright people in their specific core skill. So they rightly get recognised, and then almost inevitably promoted to be retained and to get paid more money. And yet that whole Peter principle is that if you're not careful, there's this bizarre assumption in the Western world that because someone is technically good at their job, they'll also be good with people. I mean, isn't that bizarre when you think about it?
I think it's.
But it's such an assumption.
Yeah.
It's like, well, he's very competent at managing that computer system. Let's put him in charge of 100 people.
Yeah. And
expect him to be a success. Meanwhile, he's in his happy place when he's
Yeah.
programmed.
Yeah.
Don't ask him to manage people unless you've set him up for success. Let's not blame him first. Let's say, did we check first if he wanted to be promoted, whether he wanted to be in charge of people?
Yeah.
Because that might have given us a quick answer.
Yes.
But maybe he said yes, he would. Well, then you need to have other checks and balances. So some kind of, whether it's personality profiling, psychometric testing, some kind of interview with other stakeholders in the business who can do a check on whether he's sufficiently competent to lead people.
And then train them to lead.
And then train them and mentor them, coach them, help them. What a novel idea.
Oh, how bizarre.
Yeah, how bizarre. So, look, I mean, I'm not trying to sit here and be a smart ass. I mean, we all need help. Me included, we all need help as
good God, yeah.
as leaders, right? But it is quite frightening when you dig a little bit, not even that deep, at certain organisations, and discover that people have been promoted beyond where they wanted to be promoted in some cases, or just beyond their training, beyond their capability.
Yeah. I mean, looking, and I know there's been a few forays from the oil and gas industry down to 4-5 Commando now both, to draw on comparisons and see how they do things to try and learn from it, which I think has been a fantastic thing.
Okay.
But you're right. I mean, if I'm not mistaken, Royal Marines officer training is about 15 months in total. So you've got 8 months of the same grind as every other recruit.
Yeah.
That's non-commissioned to get your lid, and you've got 7 months of specific officer training.
Yeah.
and rightly so, because you're leading people in some very difficult circumstances, and you need to know your onions.
Yeah, basically, yeah.
But even to do a junior command course or a senior command course, it's 3 months.
Yeah.
Same as and in the same form as officer training. It's a pass or fail.
Yes.
You don't get the certificate at the end saying, right, you've done the course.
Attended.
You've got to pass key criteria tests along the way. If you fail them, you get binned.
Yes.
And you have to go back again another time.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's not a given that you're going to get that promotion, because you've got to prove that you can bloody do it.
Yes. Yeah.
And there is very, very little of that in the corporate world.
No, you're right.
In no matter what industry.
Yeah, I mean, there's not much more to say on that, because you're right. And I guess on the one hand, one could say it's deliberately designed that way because NCOs and officers, commissioned officers, are in charge of the decisions about people's lives and troops' lives and critical decisions on the battlefield.
Yeah.
So clearly, the importance of pass-fail leadership tasks and competence training is critical. Yeah. But I agree with you. Leadership is extremely important, if not life and death important, in the commercial world. So surely, in industries, in companies where scant attention is paid to leadership courses, competence courses, promotion, preparation type programs, where we do select, train and promote in accordance to some kind of criteria. It's quite bizarre how many don't seem to have much structure when it comes to that. Yeah. Which kind of, it's kind of irresponsible, really, because you're bringing new people in and you're just saying, well, we've got someone who's in charge of you, who's really not had to go through any kind of rigorous selection and preparation for that. It's somewhat disrespectful to those that they're in charge of. Yeah. So yeah, it's an opportunity. There's no question. It's an opportunity to improve, and there's no question. Most people who would listen to this, or if they thought about this, put it this way, few people would go, oh no, we're absolutely fine. Most leaders should be thinking, do we do enough? Do we do enough to prepare our leaders for success and for the responsibility of leading others in our organisation? Yeah.
There's doing a disservice to everyone by not training people.
Including to your bottom line.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know what I mean? If you want to look at it in a purely commercial sense, it's a commercial imperative. Yeah. But more than that, building on what we were saying earlier, morale, welfare, togetherness, camaraderie, turning a working group into a true team, that all requires leadership. Yes. So you're right, the Marines are particularly good at it because our work is particularly dangerous. So that makes sense. But I think there's some transferable learning. And look, I've been lucky enough, I guess, to do a bunch of that in many respects. The work that I've ended up getting into post my time in the Marines has been around management consulting, some leadership coaching, some performance coaching, facilitation. So I guess to some degree money where my mouth is, in a way, absolutely. You'd have to ask the people I've worked with whether it's been particularly valuable or not, but I think I've definitely found that to be the most rewarding work. Is actually, because I've been there and seen it in a particularly challenging environment from the military, I feel reasonably credible and confident, and certainly enjoy working with some incredible leaders in other industries, and as I say, predominantly energy sector for the last while, to help them. Sort of work on any weaknesses, get to know themselves better, and therefore lead their teams more effectively.
Yeah,
it's been a really rewarding type of work to be involved in.
Yeah, I can imagine. It's essential.
Yeah.
Really, it's an essential piece of work.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. What about you? I mean, from your side, just from, I mean, we're on the topic. You touch on stress, mental health, morale. Like, what observations do you have, and do you feel that society, industry is slightly more aware, or do you think a lot more work to do? And if so, where do we start in that space?
I think, well, there's definitely been streets ahead of where we were sort of 30 years ago.
Okay.
I think there's definite
That's
change,
good.
definite difference, even a cultural one.
Yeah.
And I think that's a generational piece.
Okay.
Baby boomers and Gen X are, I think, the last of the more stoic generations.
Yeah. Right.
I think after that, there's been a softer, and I think it started. I think the softer side was started with things like in schools, with taking away competitiveness.
Yes. Yeah.
So people then are shocked when they fail at something.
Yeah.
So I think that for me that was the beginning, as far as I can see, the beginnings of the softening. Life is hard, and we need to maintain that robustness.
Yeah.
And that resilience and the bounce back ability.
Yes. Yeah.
In terms of being open to talking more, I think, and expressing emotions, I think that's been a good step forwards.
Okay.
I think it started to go too far in some ways.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
I think, and people can feel free to shoot me down for my opinion, but it's just my opinion. It's not a judgment as such. It's just an observation. That those involved in kind of perpetuating the woke side of society and culture are very open about their feelings and their emotions and the feelings that they're feeling based on those emotions, and it's I think it's gone too far the other way. I think it needs to be reined in a little bit to bring back some kind of balance.
Yeah.
And it's developing a sense of self-entitlement amongst the younger generations.
Yeah.
That is wholly misguided, because the world gives you fuck all for free.
Yeah, indeed. And I quite like, and again, maybe it's showing my bias to my background, but the likes of Jocko Willink and David Goggins, SEALs, former SEALs, who talk about extreme ownership and just taking ownership, right? Just like, life is hard. The sooner we accept that, the better. We used to say in the Marines, train hard, fight easy.
Absolutely.
In some ways, the more you can learn in a relatively safe environment, school, growing up, the easier life will be. Whereas, as you touching on, and I agree with you, if school's too easy, you've removed competitiveness, visibility of performance, all that kind of stuff, then life will be hard. So you're reversing it, and it's actually it's going to be a negative in the long run. But yeah, the sort of Willink, Goggins type of message I really like for youngsters, because it's around stop waiting for someone else to save your day, or to give you instructions on how to survive this or that or the other, or to give you an excuse.
Yeah.
Take ownership, take charge, take the reins, master your own destiny.
Yes.
Every marathon starts with the first step. Decide on your goal, your destination, your target, and then start moving towards it. And learn as you go. Implement some discipline in terms of your sleep routine, your eating routine, your work routine, a balance between exercise and study and social time and commitment to your craft. The balance won't be perfect, but you'll learn as you go along, and then you can revise the discipline, you can tweak the discipline, you can tweak the time you wake up in the morning, etc. Admiral McRaven as well, former SEAL officer.
Yep.
That simple one about start by making your bed.
Yes.
Again, for anyone who sympathises with whether we call it woke or whether we just call it lazy or whether we call it entitled, whatever. That's largely labelling. That's society labelling and finding ways to box people in certain places.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, as McRaven said, it's like the key to self-esteem and progress and success is a sense of progress.
Yeah.
So start by making your bed. Just do the little things. Like start by getting out of bed when your alarm goes off, rather than hitting the snooze button.
Yeah.
And again, don't beat yourself up if you do press the snooze button, but just learn from it and try not to do it the next day. Go to bed earlier, whatever it is.
Yeah.
But try and get up when your alarm goes. Make the bed straight away. Have a shower. Get in some clean clothes.
Yeah.
Have a shave or whatever. Again, I'm not, whatever your presentation is, that is the best you can be. Do that properly. But there are some universal truths, and this is where I agree with. It's like we've got all sorts of opinion now on what you can and can't be judged about, but there are certain universal kind of aspects of expectation. So if you're looking to collaborate and interact with others, then people are looking for certain social norms, like brush your teeth, have a shower,
yes,
wear some clean clothes, don't stink,
don't be
high on substance, don't be drunk, don't be when I say don't be swearing, I mean swearing's okay if you're in an environment where that's fine for that time.
Yes.
Don't go into an environment where you're perhaps interviewing for a job and it's fairly clean cut and be effing and blinding. Again, common sense.
Yes.
Unfortunately, common sense not so common. So
it is a dying commodity.
Putting podcasts like this is an opportunity to sort of share common sense. And so and then as you go through your day, again, random acts of kindness is one I quite like. The rack.
Yeah.
Little things that you can do for others. So eye contact, smile, offer to help.
Yeah.
Can you carry someone's bags up the stairs? Can you open a door for someone?
Yeah.
If there's an opportunity to offer someone a cup of tea or a glass of water or something, simple stuff. But all of that gives you a sense of contribution, a sense of progress. It doesn't cost money, most of those things. And yet, as a youngster or someone trying to make their way in this world, those adherence to some of those simple principles can go a long way to setting you up for success.
Yeah.
And I guess that long kind of monologue is kind of building on what you said there, which is that ties into what we said earlier. Like, if we try to attend to every gripe, every voice, we end up spinning our wheels as a society, going nowhere.
Yeah.
And then we become vulnerable to evil forces from outside, because we will be seen as disorganized, disconnected, incapable of defending ourselves, whether that's as a nation or as an organization. So, as they say, charity begins at home, doesn't it? Get your own house in order.
Well, wouldn't that be nice?
You know, and don't get distracted by it. We need to decide, you know, like, we're a democratic nation here in the UK and in South Africa, and it's like, you know, what are the guiding principles? And that's at a macro level, but even at a sort of micro level, within a family or within a team, what are the agreed governing norms that we all buy into?
Yeah. And
then once we bought into them, I quite like Steve Hansen, All Blacks. He talks about the All Blacks culture, and he talks about the smaller leadership group decides what the non-negotiables are. Mm-hmm. So those aren't open for wide debate because they're proven over generations.
Yeah.
Then there are the negotiables, to which everyone has input. Mm-hmm. But once everyone's had input and they're then discussed, an agreement is made on what we will choose as our principles, or as our rules, or as our tactics, whatever. Once that's been done, no one can come back later and say, I told you so. No. You have your say, then we agree the way. Yeah. And then we've all bought into it and we do our best for that.
Yes.
We don't say afterwards, well, I knew that wasn't going to work. And that's the All Blacks, one of the best proven sports teams in the world for many, many decades. So I think we can learn from that at a micro and macro level. It's the same principle. Give everyone a vote, give everyone their choice, but once that's been given and we've made a choice, try and get behind what we're after, give leadership a chance. Mm-hmm. It's then on leadership to prove that they're worthy. Now, whether that's a new government or that's a new C-suite at your organisation, or whether it's young assistant drillers offshore, you know, in charge of a small drill crew. That person deserves your respect and deserves an opportunity. But obviously, if they then abuse that position, you've got to ask questions. And then, Absolutely. As a leadership group, you've got to step back and say, well, did we set this person up for success? You know. So I know there's a lot in there. It's a fascinating topic.
Yeah, I mean, it's huge. I mean, there's a whole bloody series on that.
Yeah, yeah, that's another series, isn't it, with a series of episodes?
Yes, yeah, 100% it would be, yeah. It might be a fun thing to actually put together, actually. Yeah. I mean, I guess you pick 5 to 10 of the sort of absolutely key. Maybe it is the non-negotiables, as most teams would talk about, or whatever, and then you then unpack those principles. Yeah. And discuss our experiences of those in different organisations, right? Yeah. Yeah. Actually, that could be a lot of fun.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that would be very interesting.
But you know, one of the things that I'm, obviously inspired by your research journey, and obviously I've been on my own one more recently.
Yes.
And I think what I would share is that, again, it's intuitive, but you only know it once you've experienced it, is when you get genuinely curious and you actually take the time to read and research a topic, whatever. Yeah. Isn't it incredible how you challenge what you thought you knew, but more importantly, you embrace a more inquisitive approach to life, including challenging some of the assumptions and presumptions and principles that we thought were abundantly clear, but then, like I was reading something today about double loop and triple loop learning, and it's kind of like that. We do things a certain way, we can change that, but then you can challenge, why do you do that at all? And then you can challenge like the value system that constructed that idea in the first place. Yeah. And it's going several layers back, isn't it?
Yes.
versus when we're growing up, we tend to just one-dimensionally look at something and say it's either right or it's wrong. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So things like podcasting, I think they're hugely valuable because it's a chance to actually step off the hamster wheel and think about why we think the way we do things the way we do, why we talk about things the way we do.
Yeah.
Because all of these things were made up by, as Steve Jobs said, human beings that were not necessarily any smarter than you and me. But we've just gone along with it.
Yeah.
We haven't necessarily challenged it, thought about it.
Yes. Yeah. I think that's becoming increasingly more difficult to do, to challenge.
Yeah.
Because there's a huge reluctance, and I think a level of arrogance systemically that refuses to accept challenge because it's right because this is what we say is right.
Yeah.
And academia is a big culprit for that as well. Driving.
I thought you were going to say cult. It is a bit of a cult.
Well, actually, yeah, it is. Yeah, the cult of academia.
But yeah,
there'll be people pulling their hair out at that. But there we go. Tough shit. Suck it up.
You're presupposing a bunch of people are going to watch this, which I.
Yes.
But hey, you never know. But
it used to.
It's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
Academia. I tell you.
Yeah.
I've realised, it's. I mean, I started off and completely stand by. Loving the opportunity to complete research and to be curious and that whole growth journey, but equally, you also discover that it's another of these kind of entities that has evolved the way it has for decades, centuries, and
yes,
if academia itself is not willing to challenge how it does things, it can become another kind of power-hungry entity, which makes it quite difficult to negotiate and to work with. So, I think we all need to be open to constructive feedback.
Absolutely,
right? It goes for everything and everyone.
Yeah, we can't change without it. Not positively anyway.
Something I challenge myself with actually quite a lot is I kind of think to myself, have I given my own team at work a recent opportunity to feed back to me what I don't do so well, what I could do better? I mean, guilty, right? It's because it's one of those things we talk about it, and again, charity begins at home, and I'm a big one where I kind of go, whenever I'm making observations about something, I'm often thinking, right, where do you stand on this? Like, if someone was watching, what would they say about you?
Yeah.
How open have you been to change? How receptive are you to feedback? The answer is I've become better, but I'm naturally quite defensive. Just ask my wife on that one.
Mine would say similar.
Yeah.
So I shouldn't worry.
So, but this is part of it, isn't it? It's like, it's to make a better world, we kind of all need to be more receptive. It's an obvious one, but unfortunately not a massively practiced one. Just kind of being open to honest feedback and more importantly, once you've had that feedback, being prepared to change if change is required.
Yeah, I think we get very good at listening to feedback in the call. Because you're going to get it no matter whether you want it, whether you want it or not. And as always, the delivery method varies.
Yes.
The style is the same, but the method.
Yes.
Or maybe it's the method that's the same, but the style of delivery is different.
Yeah. True.
That's
True.
That's the right way around.
Yeah.
That makes more sense. My head was just going, what? Shut up.
Your mouth moved before your brain had a chance to catch up.
I had this jumble of words and just threw them out.
Yeah. No, I know what you mean. Yeah,
but
the
I think
style can be quite brutal from some in the Corps.
Oh fuck yes. Yeah. You like that? Whoa, shit, bad. Yeah. Okay.
That was effing shit, Mr. Wigham. Sorry?
Yeah.
You heard me.
Also, with your, you talked about mood set, and when I first saw your stuff on LinkedIn about mood set, I was like, I really like that.
Yeah.
But how we receive feedback, or how we perceive the feedback we're being given, is very much dependent on the mood we're in. Some days we're more receptive to it than others.
Yes.
Depending on what's going on.
Yeah. Yeah, someone asked, I think it's Eric Doyle actually, when I did a podcast with Eric, he's a good guy, and Eric was like, what about people that are in an emotionally different place to you? Mm-hmm. And the answer I give on that one is you have to meet people where they are. So I completely agree with you. Look, I don't need to tell you, you know this better than most. But if you're prepared to meet people where they are, say they're very depressed or anxious, and if you can get to that tone level and empathize in an authentic way,
yes,
you can then potentially be respected and embraced because you've taken the time to do that, and then you're in a position to possibly slowly but surely elevate that person out of that particular emotion to a slightly more positive emotion or mood, which is kind of like setting their mood and helping them find a slightly more positive place to receive feedback and stuff like that. But the reality is as well, let's be brutally honest, is that you might try and meet someone at a certain level and you might struggle and you might not even manage to, because for whatever reason, whatever it is that's maybe triggered their negative emotion, they may need some time. So again, leadership, you've got to try and discern when there is an opportunity to, someone's just, maybe it was a bad email, maybe it was something went wrong, but it's not the end of the world and you can kind of bring them out of it quite quickly. Yeah. But maybe if you've lost a family member or you've had some real tragedy befall you, well, then it's going to take time. And as a line manager or a colleague or whatever, it's being able to discern, okay, this person needs some time, they need more support, and it's disingenuous to try and share a really positive message with someone who's in mourning. You know what I mean? Yeah. So, but no, it's a good question. It's a good point. I think the other thing I quite like, and Gavin Hastings, who was on a couple of kind of webinars or virtual workshops that I ran during the pandemic, I was connected to him through a friend, and Gavin came on and it was a case of interviewing him for the workshop, and great, having a celeb who was willing to give some time. And he used to talk about controlling the controllables, which is a fairly well-known kind of sports perspective. And I guess with mood set, that's the key element of the idea of mood set, is as a leader or as a team member, the one thing you can control is how you come across to others. Yes. And we're all guilty, and I used to try and relate this to the work-home balance. When we come home, if we've got kids, we have that responsibility to try and walk into the house with a positive energy and a smile, because our kids are hypersensitive to how daddy is or mummy is when they arrive home from wherever they've been. And it's very similar to the work environment. We human beings are incredibly finely tuned animals. Yes. Incredibly sensitive to the non-verbals, let alone verbals, of our line management and our key leaders. And if we sense that our line manager is annoyed, angry, frustrated, upset, stomping around, swearing under their breath, whatever, you can just imagine that atmosphere for a while. Unproductive, walking on eggshells, worried, not likely to approach you with a question that actually might be quite an important question, etc. Simple stuff. We're not talking rocket science here. And yet, all too often, you can imagine in so many work environments across the planet, it's happening a lot.
Yeah.
And control the controllables. Imagine if we could just land this idea of mood set, this idea that you can set the mood for yourself and others, and you can. Like we can choose to, and there's research that even just by smiling, I can elevate my own mood. So if I'm feeling a bit down, but I actually just create a smile on my face, even if I have to use my fingers, you can make others smile, and you can lift the mood. Eye contact, asking someone how their day has gone, even if you've had a crap day. Just taking that tiny bit of time to ask someone else, how's your day been?
Yeah.
Show an interest.
Yes.
And again, we're talking KISS, as you said earlier, keep it simple, stupid, like really simple stuff here. And yet, you and I know, and everyone who listens to this would know, not practiced to the degree that it should be. And yet, the difference it can make is proven.
Yeah.
Oh. So it's a controllable. Parents, management in work environments, rig leaders in particular, or anyone who's a leader of an isolated group of people, the influence you can have on productivity is mind-blowing if you actually just take the time to be a bit more positive.
Yeah. There's a series on Netflix called New Amsterdam.
Yes.
Have you seen it yet?
Yes, I have. The hospital.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the new medical director comes in.
I mean, I've not watched it for ages, but my wife and I watched a few series a while back. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah. No, it's just this new medical director comes in, and throughout, no matter what is going on in his life, and he has some pretty horrendous.
Yeah, that's right.
He has cancer.
Sorry.
His wife dies.
Yes.
And, you know.
Yes.
And yet he's always asking his people, how can I help?
Yes, indeed. Yeah, that's right. That's his
patients
or
his
question.
staff.
That's his. Yeah.
How can I help?
It's funny you say that, Simon, because I thought exactly the same when I watched it. I thought, funny enough, this resonates with kind of what I was trying to. Yeah. Great example.
Brilliant.
Thanks for reminding me. He is. I mean, it's a drama, but yeah, it's representative of the best and there will be examples like that in hospitals and workplaces.
Yeah.
There are some fantastic shining lights when it comes to putting your own problems to one side and being positive.
Yes.
There are some leaders where I work, without naming names, who are quite good at that as well. I've noticed they've had some pretty challenging stuff happening in the sidelines that I've been aware of, and yet they choose to be professional and positive in a work environment. And it's the mark of a leader, I believe. Is that ability to, grace under pressure and park your personal woes, because your role is to help others with theirs. Now, don't get me wrong. Being vulnerable is also important, but you can't shake off, as Willink and Goggins say. You've got to take ownership, and if your role is to be the leader, then in many ways what comes with that is the responsibility to generally park your negative stuff and be available for other people's negative stuff. And then ideally you have maybe a confidant or a group of peers who can help you with yours, and then you can be vulnerable there, and so you can be authentic with others and maybe come across as having a few challenges, but I think the dynamic needs to be that you're serving the team, and therefore you try and look after everyone else first.
Yes.
Certainly a good way to try and approach them.
Yeah, I think so. It's showing some humanity, isn't it?
Yeah.
There's two bosses I've had that I picked up two things, one from each of them.
Okay.
One was he used to what he called Fuck Up Friday.
Yeah, okay.
So every Friday, and he would say, right, everybody, let's grab a coffee, bacon rolls and donuts and all that sort of shit, the usual good stuff.
Yeah.
Right, it's Fuck Up Friday. This is my best fuck up for the week. Who can outdo me? There's a prize for who outdoes me.
Brilliant.
Just to put a light,
breaks the ice, doesn't it?
positive spin on, and it's not wanting people to fail, but encouraging them to push themselves. And if they do fail, it's okay, because then there's that debrief.
Yes.
Okay, so how did that happen?
Yeah.
What did you learn from it?
Yes.
Okay, if that was, what would you do? You know, if you could do it again, what would you do differently?
Brilliant idea. I love it, actually. Really good.
I've utilised that.
Wow.
And it just, you say, it breaks the ice.
Yeah.
It encourages people to go, actually, it's okay if I make a mistake, because it doesn't matter. But, you know, be accountable, hold yourself responsible, be accountable for your actions.
Yes. Yeah.
And own it, and then embrace it. Go,
Yeah.
well, okay.
Yeah. No, I really like that, actually. I really like that. It's a good idea.
So, and I've had my mind fart for the day. I forgot what the second one was.
It was another boss. It was another boss.
Yeah, what was that?
There's another one.
Fuck's sake. Yeah, I can't remember what that was. It'll come to me.
While you're thinking, funny enough, one of the best books I've read on culture is called The Culture Code by a guy called Daniel Coyle.
Yes.
And in that, if you've read it, you'll remember that he kind of touches on what you've just said. And I think it was his reference to the SEALs, and it was after an operational action, doing an after action review, and in order to get everyone to speak up, it was the commander would say, right, this is how I fucked up. Mm-hmm. He would start off by saying, I messed this up. And it broke the ice, and it encouraged, it's basically told everyone, look,
yeah,
this is not about, being found out or being held up, put into trouble for saying, this is about being open about the things that didn't go so well there, so that we can improve. And starting off, if the most senior person in the room says, by the way, I made a real cock up here, this is what I did, I got lost, or I forgot my radio, or whatever, it gave everyone else permission to be honest and open.
Yeah.
So it's the same principle, like fuck up Friday, or
yeah,
senior person in the room, just say, look, it's okay to be honest, and by the way, this is what I screwed up. So no, I like it. It reminds me of that.
It's simple, but it's so powerful.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, and it's easier said than done. It's easier said than done. Our egos are incredibly strong, whether we like to admit it or not, and we often, I'm guilty of, when there's an opportunity to share a vulnerability or a mess up, the temptation is to not use that particular example or touch on that. The temptation is to sort of reference something a little bit perhaps less severe, or not be totally honest about what you did. And yet, again, we do know from experience, and we do know from how inspiring it is when you see someone else, whether it's dramatized in a movie or a reality, a real situation that you experience maybe, where you feel genuinely touched and inspired by someone who completely owns up for making a cock up, and you go, wow, that was so human, that was so appealing, and that's really increased my respect for that person.
Yeah. And
you just have to remember that, and then reflect that for yourself when you have an opportunity to be honest, even though the temptation based on your ego is to go, oh no, I didn't mess up, whatever.
Yeah.
Who messed up? Wasn't me. And you look at global leaders who have genuinely been the most well remembered and respected. Mm-hmm. And goes back to what we said earlier about authenticity. They are typically very happy to be open and honest about their mess ups, to say things that others aren't prepared to, be honest about what they wanted to achieve. It might be something simple, whatever, but they're happy enough to be vulnerable. I think in South Africa, Mandela, Nelson Mandela, just he said the things that other people weren't prepared to say. He was absolutely honest.
Yes.
He had the courage with his own people to say that if we don't embrace the Afrikaner and the white South African, then we'll just be constantly at war. So someone's got to be big enough after the history of South Africa to say, well, let's reconcile. Let's find a way forward.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we're going to be spinning our wheels here for decades. So, and then you look at Gandhi. You look at some of the sort of other sort of fairly universally respected leaders who kind of real servant leaders, right? Just humble, authentic, courageous enough to call out bad behaviour at the highest level, often risking their own lives.
Yeah, going to jail.
Going to jail
for blowing shit up.
Well, yeah, but I mean, sometimes unfortunately that's what it takes. I mean, that's a different rabbit hole we could go down, but
it's
that whole piece around lead with courage and then get people's attention, and tying into what we said earlier about meeting someone where they're at. If you're trying to get the attention of someone who's purely into violence, you might have to meet them where they're at. Simple.
Yes, indeed.
Shall we end it there?
Recently topical, yeah.
Maybe end it with us laughing and cut out the slight prelude.
Well, yeah.
After all of our lovely conversations about soft skills and everything.
Soft skills. Well, there's a time and a place for everything, isn't there?
No, I'm kidding. I'm more than happy to talk about it. I think Mandela went to prison because he there was obviously a military arm to the ANC.
Yes.
And a bit like Martin Luther King and others, you can demonstrate peacefully, but if you're being treated violently, you've got to respond.
Well, people will only put up with things for so long.
Correct.
And they'll eventually kick back.
And it even ties into what we said about bullies, right? Sometimes the best way to deal with a bully is to bully him back. Sometimes the only language they understand.
Yeah, it is. And to pussyfoot around just encourages.
Yeah.
Builds their confidence.
Yeah. You're just building up their ego even more.
Yeah.
So it's funny how all of these things are interlinked, isn't it?
Yes.
It's amazing.
Yeah, because that comes through from a lack of parental leadership.
That's another rabbit hole.
Yes.
It really is. I mean, that's so fundamental. How kids are brought up. I mean, that really is, you've hit right there on arguably the most important thing, that if we, as a society, if we could just confront that, because you think about it, everything, we're all a product of our upbringing.
Absolutely.
And so the most formative years for all of us were our childhood and our teens. And so if you really want to influence that source, now it's a huge challenge, but you've somehow got to influence parents, families, and what's happening in the home.
Yeah.
Because that's the elephant in the room, really. That's society, right?
It is. I don't know if there's been a study of a similar vein in the UK, but in the States they did a study of the prison population.
Okay.
The male prison population.
Right. Yeah.
And if they reduced childhood abuse, or if they eradicated childhood abuse, they would reduce the prison population by 80%.
Yeah, because they could draw a line straight back in each of those prisoners' cases to some kind of messed up childhood. Yeah, abused.
It was done through the ACE study, the
Okay.
Adverse Childhood Experiences.
Okay. Yeah.
And they took the data from there, amongst other things.
It makes intuitive sense, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah,
very much so.
You as I keep saying, sort of a function of how we were brought up, the trust that we have, the things that we have, the way that we're treated, all of that good stuff. It just we absolutely just absorb all of that like a sponge when we're kids, and we play it out one way or another.
Yeah.
Because it's funny, I mean, this is probably not for the podcast, but driving so my missus has got a few properties around Aberdeen. One of them is an Airbnb, and she'd asked me to check something. In fact, it was the shower wasn't draining properly, so go in there and just try and see if I can clear that. And where she's got her place, it's opposite like some council flats, and there was some older woman sort of looking out the window at me, and it was one of those fairly vacant kind of looks, and I know that it's council flat, and I just thought, it just got me thinking about life, society, even here in the first world, and the whole piece around upbringing, experience, education, aspiration, ambition, generation to generation.
Yeah.
And I was just driving, I was just thinking, we just accept it, like, it is what it is, but like, how do you influence that? Like, how do you change the course of that? Because if you can change the course of that in a country or a society, you can absolutely flip the fortunes of your country. But is it just something we just have to accept? There's this sort of spread. Is it just something that's unfixable?
Crikey. I think
like unemployment, and then there's the council social environment, and then that just gets passed one generation to the next.
Yeah.
How do you break that?
Crikey. I mean, there's a lot of factors at play there, isn't there? Because regardless of somebody's upbringing and their environment and their situation, there are some people who've grown up in horrible environments
and gone on to be very successful.
Very successful, yeah. and be thoroughly nice people.
Yes.
So there's a certain amount of, it goes back to taking responsibility for and being accountable for your actions, your behaviours, and what and how you say.
Yeah, no, you're right. Because equally, you're spot on. You've got kids who've had a phenomenally, blessed upbringing, who've then just dropped off the wrong side of the railway track and become, just a burden on society. They've chosen a path. So you're right. It's definitely, there's some individual accountability, isn't there, as well?
Yeah.
And I guess we pick up the pieces for all of those.
Yes, it's like one of the things I like that Jordan Peterson pushes is about it's about equal opportunity, not equal outcome.
Yes.
Provide the opportunity.
Yes.
And it's up to you to take it and make the best of it.
Yeah. No, I mean, Peterson resonates with us, I think.
Yes.
His
a lot of what he says.
Life and everything. It's around taking ownership, and I mean, his messaging is quite Christian based.
Yeah.
It's fairly principle. I mean, but it doesn't have to be. But it's the point being. In many cases, what he's conveying are principles that we've adopted for centuries as something that works. So why now are we trying to challenge stuff that works, like the work stuff? A lot of the trance and other conversations that have emerged over the last 2-3 decades only, and it's not a lot before that. But it's caused a lot of splintering in society.
Yes.
It goes against proven culture, which was doing just fine for a long time.
The society's fracturing.
Yeah.
This drive for diversity, equality, and inclusion is creating more division.
Right. Yeah, good way of putting it. Yeah, it's ironic, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Some people have, there are some different schools of thought on it, but one is that it's actually a way for those who have been on the receiving end of a lot of flack from different sections of the community. This is now a way for some of those that were more disgruntled to have a go back. It is being used as a revenge tool for some people. Not for everybody. I'm not going to make any sweeping statements, but just again, it's just observations.
Yeah. Yeah. No. I mean, yeah. Yeah. It is.
So, cheers, Tim. Thanks for the chat. Pearls of wisdom.
Thoroughly enjoyed it.
Yeah, no, it's one of the most enjoyable chats I've had for a long time. So
likewise.
I've thoroughly enjoyed it. I hope you have too. Please like, subscribe, comment, give us your thoughts on the conversation, and share it with friends, family, colleagues, whoever. It's random people you bump into in the street. Don't mind, whatever. Do a roulette or tombola of email addresses and just send it out. So, see you in the next episode. Cheers.
Cheers. Thanks, Simon.
Cheers, mate.
Appreciate it.